The story of the Iron Warriors begins not with glory, but with abandonment. Like his brother Primarchs, Perturabo was stolen from the Emperor's laboratories on Terra by the machinations of the Chaos Gods and cast into the void. His gestation capsule eventually crashed upon the mountainous world of Olympia, a planet of feuding city-states where warfare was not merely common, but constant. The infant Primarch was discovered by workers who brought him before Damikos, the so-called tyrant of Lakos. Damikos, a shrewd and calculating ruler, immediately recognized the potential in this strange child. Unlike some of his brother Primarchs who were raised with compassion, Perturabo's relationship with his foster father was complex and ultimately toxic. Damikos saw the child not as a son to nurture, but as a weapon to wield against his enemies. The tyrant raised Perturabo to be a tool of conquest, parading the rapidly growing child before rivals as both a curiosity and a threat. From the moment of his discovery, Perturabo displayed intellectual capabilities that bordered on the supernatural. He absorbed knowledge at an astonishing rate, mastering complex mathematical principles, engineering concepts, and military tactics that took others decades to comprehend. By the time he was but a few years old, he was redesigning the fortifications of Lakos, transforming the already formidable mountain stronghold into an impregnable bastion. His designs were not merely functional, but possessed a certain cold beauty, massive granite structures with mathematically perfect proportions that inspired awe and dread in equal measure. Yet for all his genius, Perturabo remained emotionally stunted. Damikos provided no paternal warmth, viewing their relationship as purely transactional. The tyrant expected obedience and results, offering little praise and no love. This emotional neglect planted the seeds of resentment that would later blossom into bitter hatred. Perturabo came to view himself as nothing more than a means to an end, a perspective that would color his entire existence. As he matured, Perturabo's military genius became evident on Olympia's many battlefields. He led Damikos' armies to victory after victory, conquering rival city-states with brutal efficiency. His approach to warfare was coldly pragmatic. He saw no virtue in heroic last stands or glorious charges, preferring overwhelming force applied with mathematical precision. Enemy fortifications, no matter how ancient or supposedly impregnable, fell before his siegecraft. The young Primarch became known as the Hammer of Olympia, a title that acknowledged both his effectiveness and his nature as a tool wielded by the tyrant. Despite his successes, Perturabo found no joy in conquest. He began to resent the endless warfare of Olympia, seeing it as pointless and wasteful. He dreamed of building rather than destroying, of creating magnificent structures that would stand for millennia as testaments to human achievement. In rare moments of solitude, he would sketch designs for impossible cities with soaring towers and perfect symmetry. But Damikos had no interest in his foster son's architectural ambitions, demanding instead more conquests, more glory, more power. The relationship between Perturabo and Damikos deteriorated further as the Primarch grew to adulthood. Perturabo increasingly chafed under the tyrant's authority, while Damikos became ever more suspicious of his foster son's growing popularity among the people of Lakos. The tension between them was palpable, a cold war of glares and veiled threats that seemed destined to erupt into open conflict. This uneasy status quo was shattered by the arrival of the Emperor of Mankind. Unlike the discovery of some Primarchs, there was no grand hunt or chase. The Master of Mankind simply arrived at the gates of Lakos with a small retinue of custodians, demanding an audience with the tyrant and his foster son. The moment Perturabo laid eyes upon the Emperor, he recognized his true father. All the bitterness and resentment he had harbored against Damikos crystallized in that moment of recognition. Without hesitation, Perturabo knelt before the Emperor, pledging his eternal loyalty. The Emperor, for his part, granted Perturabo command of the 4th Legion of Space Marines, the Iron Warriors. The 4th Legion had been fighting the Emperor's wars for decades before being reunited with their gene sire. Unlike many of the other legions, they had retained their original name from the earliest days of the Great Crusade. The Iron Warriors designation was not a post-reunification naming, but had been their identity since their founding on Terra. This fact would later become a point of pride for the Legion. They had been Iron Warriors before Perturabo, and their identity was not solely defined by their Primarch. The pre-Perturabo Iron Warriors had already established a reputation as siege specialists and void combatants. Recruited primarily from the hardy mining stock of Terra's American hives and the Nordafric conclaves, they were known for their resilience and technical aptitude. The Legion had been deployed to some of the most grueling campaigns of the early Crusade, breaking deadlocked sieges and storming fortifications that had resisted all other Imperial forces. This specialization came at a cost. The 4th Legion suffered casualty rates that would have broken lesser forces. They were frequently deployed as a blunt instrument, thrown against the most heavily defended enemy positions, with the expectation that they would eventually grind through by sheer determination. This operational doctrine bred a certain fatalism among the Legion's ranks, a grim acceptance that many would die to secure victory. When Perturabo assumed command, he found a Legion already shaped by hardship and pragmatism. These were not warriors who expected glory or recognition. They were soldiers who understood that war was ultimately about achieving objectives, regardless of the cost. In this, they were a perfect match for their Primarch's coldly logical approach to warfare. The integration of Olympian recruits further reinforced these tendencies. The warlike city-states of Olympia produced youths who were already hardened by constant conflict. These were not wide-eyed idealistics, but pragmatic fighters who understood the brutal realities of war. The cultural indoctrination of new recruits emphasized endurance, technical expertise, and absolute loyalty to the chain of command. Training regimens were notoriously harsh, with an emphasis on siege warfare, fortification, and combined arms operations. Iron Warriors neophytes learned not only how to fight, but how to build and destroy fortifications, how to maintain and repair complex machinery, and how to calculate artillery trajectories under combat conditions. This technical focus set them apart from more assault-oriented legions like the World Eaters or the Space Wolves. The Olympian influence manifested in other ways as well. The Legion adopted aspects of Olympian martial culture, including the use of distinctive geometric patterns in their heraldry and a preference for Greek-influenced naming conventions. Many Iron Warriors companies began to refer to themselves as Grand Companies, reflecting the organizational structure of Olympian armies. Yet for all the seeming compatibility between Perturabo and his Legion, their reunion began with an act of shocking brutality. Upon taking command, Perturabo ordered the infamous decimation of the Iron Warriors. 1 in 10 legionaries, chosen by lot, were beaten to death by their brothers. This was not a response to any failure or dishonor. It was simply Perturabo's way of demonstrating his absolute authority and establishing the standard of discipline he expected. The psychological impact of this decimation cannot be overstated. It fundamentally altered the relationship between Perturabo and his sons, creating a dynamic based on fear rather than respect or love. Iron Warriors who survived the decimation were left with complex emotional trauma, guilt for having participated in the execution of their brothers, fear of their Primarch's unpredictable wrath, and a desperate need to prove their worth to avoid future purges. This trauma manifested in different ways. Some Iron Warriors became obsessively devoted to perfection, believing that flawless performance was the only protection against their Primarch's displeasure. Others grew emotionally detached, suppressing all feelings as a defense mechanism against the horror they had participated in. Still others internalized Perturabo's callous utilitarianism, convincing themselves that the decimation had been necessary to forge a stronger legion. The decimation also created a culture of silence within the Legion. Iron Warriors rarely spoke of the incident, even among themselves, but its shadow loomed over every interaction with their Primarch. They learned to read Perturabo's moods with preternatural accuracy, adjusting their behavior to avoid triggering his wrath. This hypervigilance became so ingrained that it persisted even when Perturabo was not physically present. Perhaps most significantly, the decimation severed any possibility of genuine affection between Perturabo and his sons. Unlike Primarchs such as Horus or Sanguinius, who inspired devotion through charisma and paternal care, Perturabo commanded obedience through fear and cold competence. His legionaries followed him not because they loved him, but because they had no choice. They were bound to him by gene seed and conditioning, trapped in a relationship that mirrored Perturabo's own toxic bond with D'Amico's. In the aftermath of the decimation, Perturabo reorganized the Legion according to his own exacting standards. He imposed strict hierarchies and standardized operational procedures, eliminating the tactical flexibility that had characterized the pre-Primarch Iron Warriors. Every aspect of the Legion's function was subjected to his scrutiny, from combat doctrine to equipment maintenance protocols. The Iron Warriors that emerged from this reorganization were a formidable fighting force, but one with deep psychological scars. They had become extensions of their Primarch's will, efficient, ruthless, and utterly devoid of joy. In battle, they displayed a cold professionalism that unnerved even their fellow Astartes. They fought not for glory or the thrill of combat, but simply because it was what they had been created to do. As the Great Crusade progressed, the Iron Warriors would be molded further by their experiences, becoming ever more specialized in siege warfare and garrison duty. But the foundation of their Legion culture had been irrevocably shaped by those early years, by Perturabo's upbringing on war-torn Olympia, by the pre-existing identity of the Fourth Legion, and by the traumatic decimation that marked the beginning of their service under their Primarch. The Iron Warriors' transformation into the Imperium's preeminent siege specialists began long before the heresy would tear the galaxy asunder. While other legions cultivated reputations for lightning assaults, aerial superiority, or void warfare, the Fourth Legion methodically perfected the ancient art of siegecraft. Their approach was not born from preference but necessity. Throughout the Great Crusade, the Iron Warriors were consistently assigned to crack the most formidable fortifications that stood against Imperial compliance. Perturabo's natural genius for mathematics and engineering accelerated this specialization. He personally redesigned much of the Legion's siege equipment, improving existing patterns while developing entirely new weapons systems. The Iron Warriors' armory expanded to include specialized variants of standard Imperial war machines, Vindicators with reinforced dozer blades capable of clearing defensive obstacles under heavy fire, Predator tanks modified with additional armor plating to withstand sustained bombardment, and Land Raiders equipped with siege shields that could approach fortress walls while weathering tremendous punishment. Among the most feared weapons in their arsenal were the Typhon heavy siege tanks. These massive war machines mounted the devastating Dreadhammer siege cannon, a weapon capable of reducing even the thickest ferrocrete walls to rubble with sustained fire. The Typhon's chassis was based on the Spartan assault tank, but with significant modifications to accommodate the immense recoil of its primary weapon. Iron Warriors' Typhons typically advanced in squadrons of 3 to 5 vehicles, methodically hammering specific sections of enemy fortifications until structural collapse was achieved. Complementing these heavy tanks were the Legion's siege dreadnoughts. While most legions configured their dreadnoughts primarily for anti-infantry or anti-armor roles, the Iron Warriors frequently modified these walking sarcophagi for breaching operations. Their dreadnoughts often carried specialized equipment such as seismic hammers, drill attachments, or melta-cutters designed to breach reinforced doors and walls. The psychological impact of these machines was considerable. Defenders would hear the rhythmic pounding of siege hammers for hours before walls finally gave way, each impact a reminder of their inevitable doom. The Legion maintained an unusually large complement of Terminator armor, recognizing its value in the confined spaces of breach assaults. Iron Warriors' Terminators were equipped with specialized breaching shields and thunder hammers, creating nearly unstoppable assault units that could force entry through even the narrowest defensive choke points. These elite formations, often referred to as breacher squads, were typically held in reserve until a suitable entry point had been created by artillery or demolitions, then deployed to secure and expand the breach. Artillery formed the backbone of Iron Warriors' siege operations. The Legion maintained vast batteries of basilisks, medusas, and whirlwinds, often in numbers that dwarfed those of other legions. These weapons were not deployed haphazardly, but positioned according to exacting mathematical calculations to achieve maximum effect. Iron Warriors' artillery crews were among the finest in the Imperium, capable of dropping shells with pinpoint accuracy after only minimal ranging shots. Their fire control systems incorporated advanced targeting cogitators that could adjust for environmental factors such as wind speed, atmospheric pressure, and even planetary curvature on larger worlds. Perhaps most impressive was the Legion's mastery of sappers' techniques. Iron Warrior's siege engineers excelled at undermining enemy fortifications, digging elaborate tunnel networks beneath defensive positions to plant massive demolition charges. These operations required incredible patience and precision. A single miscalculation could cause a tunnel to collapse prematurely or a charge to detonate with insufficient force. The Iron Warriors approached this work with characteristic thoroughness, using specialized auspex equipment to map subsurface geology and structural stress points before beginning excavation. The Legion's approach to siegecraft was governed by Perturabo's doctrine of calculated attrition. Unlike some commanders who viewed sieges as opportunities for heroic assaults, the Lord of Iron saw them as mathematical problems to be solved through the systematic application of force. Each operation began with extensive reconnaissance and analysis. Fortifications were mapped in exacting detail, defensive emplacements cataloged, and supply lines assessed. Only after this thorough intelligence gathering would the Iron Warriors deploy their forces. Siege operations typically followed a predictable pattern. First came the encirclement phase, during which the Legion would establish an unbreakable cordon around the target fortification, cutting off all possibility of reinforcement or resupply. Concurrent with this encirclement, Iron Warriors' reconnaissance units would probe defenses, identifying weaknesses and priority targets. This information would feed into the development of a comprehensive siege plan, with precise timetables and resource allocations. The second phase involved the systematic degradation of the enemy's defensive capabilities. Artillery would target weapons emplacements, communications arrays, and power generators. Specialized hunter-killer teams would eliminate defensive heavy weapons crews or take out command bunkers with precision strikes. All the while, siege engineers would be constructing their own counter-fortifications, elaborate earthworks, bunkers, and fire bases from which to prosecute the siege. These siege lines often rivaled the target fortifications in complexity, designed to withstand desperate breakout attempts while providing stable firing platforms for heavy weapons. The final phase was the breach and assault. Once enemy defenses had been sufficiently weakened, the Iron Warriors would concentrate overwhelming firepower on predetermined sections of the fortification. When breaches were achieved, assault teams would pour through, securing footholds and expanding the penetration. These operations were coordinated with clockwork precision, with supporting fire lifting at exactly the right moment to allow assault teams to advance without risking friendly fire incidents. This methodical approach to siege warfare stood in stark contrast to the methods employed by the Imperial Fists, the Legion with whom the Iron Warriors shared both a specialization and a bitter rivalry. Where the 7th Legion emphasized defensive perfection and glorious last stands, the 4th focused on efficient destruction and pragmatic victory. This fundamental difference in philosophy fueled a competition that would eventually metastasize into hatred. The rivalry between the Iron Warriors and Imperial Fists predated even the discovery of their respective Primarchs. During the early Great Crusade, both legions had been deployed to sieges, often in competition with each other. The discovery of Rogel Dorn and Perturabo only intensified this existing tension. Dorn's natural charisma and the Emperor's apparent favor grated on Perturabo, who perceived himself as equally skilled yet perpetually overlooked. The differences in their approach to fortification exemplified their contrasting characters. Dorn's fortifications were expressions of defiance, proud citadels designed to be visible statements of imperial might. They incorporated aesthetic elements alongside practical defenses, creating structures that inspired as well as protected. Perturabo, conversely, designed fortifications with cold efficiency. His creations were mathematical perfection, with overlapping fields of fire, redundant systems, and psychological elements designed to break attackers' morale. Where Dorn built to inspire, Perturabo built to endure. This philosophical difference extended to their offensive operations as well. Imperial Fist sieges often culminated in heroic assaults, with Dorn himself leading his Templar brethren in breaching actions. The Iron Warriors, by contrast, preferred to let their guns do the work, only committing to assault once enemy defenses had been thoroughly degraded. Dorn's men might take a fortress through courage and sacrifice. Perturabo's would reduce it to rubble through calculated application of firepower, then occupy the ruins. The tension between the legions came to a head during the Synchronous Wars campaign, where both were deployed to overcome the formidable ring fortresses of the Badun hegemony. What began as professional rivalry devolved into dangerous competition, with both legions taking unnecessary risks to outperform the other. Though the campaign ended in imperial victory, the cost in Astartes' lives was higher than necessary, and the relationship between the legions was permanently damaged. Beyond their rivalry with the Imperial Fists, the Iron Warriors' approach to warfare set them apart from most other legions. While the likes of the Luna Wolves or White Scars sought glory in rapid victories, the Fourth Legion accepted the grinding reality of protracted sieges. Their campaigns were not celebrated in epic poems or triumphant parades, but measured in practical outcomes: fortresses reduced, compliance achieved, territories secured. This pragmatism extended to their equipment and supply chains. Iron Warriors maintained their wargear with fanatical precision, understanding that mechanical failure in a siege environment could be fatal. Their tech marines were among the finest in the Legion's Astartes, capable of field repairing even the most complex machinery under combat conditions. The Legion maintained extensive mobile forges and ammunition manufactoria, allowing them to sustain operations for extended periods without imperial resupply. The Iron Warriors' mastery of logistics was perhaps their most underappreciated skill. Sieges required vast quantities of ammunition, replacement parts, food, and medical supplies. The Legion developed sophisticated supply systems, using standardized containers that could be quickly transferred between different transport vehicles. Their quartermasters maintained detailed inventories, calculating consumption rates and scheduling resupply operations with mathematical precision. This logistical expertise allowed the Iron Warriors to sustain siege operations for months or even years when necessary. Their defensive capabilities were equally formidable. Iron Warriors' garrison forces could transform even the most basic Imperial outpost into a formidable stronghold within days. They applied the same mathematical precision to defense as they did to offense, creating layered defensive systems with interlocking fields of fire and carefully planned fallback positions. An Iron Warriors garrison might be outnumbered 10-1 and still hold out indefinitely against conventional forces. This defensive expertise made them the natural choice for garrison duty throughout the expanding Imperium. As the Great Crusade pushed ever outward, conquered territories needed to be held secure against potential counterattack or rebellion. The Iron Warriors found themselves increasingly assigned to these inglorious but essential duties, establishing and maintaining fortified outposts on hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. The psychological toll of these assignments was considerable. While other legions fought together in glorious campaigns, Iron Warriors were often deployed in company or even squad-strength detachments, isolated from their brothers and assigned to thankless garrison duties on hostile worlds. These isolated units were expected to hold their positions regardless of circumstances, often with minimal support and no realistic prospect of reinforcement. As the Great Crusade expanded across the stars, the Iron Warriors found themselves increasingly relegated to the most grueling and thankless battlefronts. While other legions fought swift campaigns of conquest that ended in triumph and glory, the Fourth Legion became the Imperium's sledgehammer, deployed to crack the hardest targets through methodical attrition. This role, which initially seemed to play to their strengths, would ultimately prove corrosive to the Legion's morale and their Primarch's loyalty. The Crusade-era deployment pattern of the Iron Warriors differed markedly from that of their brother legions, where the Ultramarines, Luna Wolves, or Blood Angels typically operated as cohesive forces under direct Primarch command. The Iron Warriors were systematically fragmented. By the midpoint of the Great Crusade, Iron Warriors detachments could be found on hundreds of worlds across the expanding Imperium, often operating in company strength or smaller. This dispersal prevented the formation of the deep brotherhood bonds that characterized other legions, and left many Iron Warriors feeling isolated from both their Primarch and their battle brothers. Compliance actions assigned to the Iron Warriors typically fell into two categories: protracted siege operations against heavily fortified Xenos holdouts, and extended garrison duties on newly compliant worlds with high strategic value or rebellion risk. Both assignments shared common characteristics. They were grueling, unglamorous, and rarely acknowledged in the grand narratives of imperial conquest that spread throughout the nascent Imperium. The Sactrata Deeps campaign exemplified the Iron Warriors' role as the Imperium's siege specialists. This extended operation targeted a network of Xenos fortress worlds nestled within a dense stellar cluster. The indigenous species, a race of silicon-based sentients called the Kargal, had spent millennia transforming their planets into virtually impregnable strongholds. Each world featured defense in depth systems, including orbital minefields, planetary shield generators, and layered fortifications that extended kilometers below the surface. Initial Imperial Navy engagements proved ineffective against the Kargal defenses. After 3 failed assaults by other Imperial forces, the War Council assigned the campaign to Perturabo and his Iron Warriors. The Lord of Iron approached the problem with characteristic thoroughness, spending weeks analyzing the Kargal defensive systems before committing his forces. His eventual battle plan called for simultaneous assaults on 3 primary worlds, with secondary forces isolating the remaining planets to prevent reinforcement. The campaign lasted for 7 years of brutal, methodical warfare. Iron Warriors siege engineers developed specialized mining vehicles capable of boring through the silicon-reinforced fortress walls. Their Techmarines modified Terminator armor with enhanced radiation shielding to allow for deep strike operations into the Kargal's geothermal power stations. Artillery batteries maintained continuous bombardment for months at a time, wearing down void shields through sheer persistence rather than overwhelming force. Victory, when it finally came, was complete but Pyrrhic. The Iron Warriors suffered nearly 30% casualties across the campaign, including the complete destruction of the 38th Grand Company at the Battle of Sactrata Prime. The Legion's sacrifice went largely unremarked in Imperial records, a single line in the Crusade chronologies noting pacification of the Sactrata region by elements of the 4th Legion. Meanwhile, the White Scar's swift conquest of the Karith cluster, accomplished with minimal casualties during the same period, received extensive coverage in Imperial propaganda and personal commendation from the Emperor. This pattern of assignment to grinding siege warfare, while other legions secured swift, glorious victories, became increasingly common as the Crusade progressed. The Iron Warriors found themselves deployed to break deadlocks, overcome seemingly impregnable defenses, and secure compliance through sheer persistence when faster methods had failed. Their specialized skills made them the obvious choice for such assignments, but the cumulative psychological effect was devastating. Garrison duty proved equally thankless. As the Imperium expanded, it faced the challenge of controlling vast territories with limited forces. The Iron Warriors, with their expertise in fortification and defensive operations, became the default solution to this strategic problem. By the latter stages of the Great Crusade, approximately 34% of the Legion's total fighting strength was committed to garrison duty across the Imperium, far more than any other legion. These garrison deployments typically involved small detachments, often a single company or even a few squads, assigned to hold critical infrastructure or suppress potential rebellion on newly compliant worlds. The Iron Warriors would establish fortified outposts, train local PDF forces, and maintain Imperial control through visible strength and calculated brutality when necessary. Such assignments could last for years, with detachments receiving little support and no prospect of rotation. The compliance of Incaladian stands as a noteworthy example of the Iron Warriors' approach to conquest and garrison. This industrial forge world had rejected initial Imperial diplomatic overtures, with its ruling tech guilds declaring independence from what they termed Terran technological regression. Rather than destroying valuable manufacturing capacity through orbital bombardment, the War Master assigned Perturabo's Legion to secure compliance with minimal infrastructure damage. The Iron Warriors deployed in force, establishing siege lines around major manufacturing centers, while simultaneously infiltrating the subterranean transit networks that connected Enkaladian's hive forges. Rather than launching a frontal assault, Perturabo ordered targeted strikes against power distribution nodes, communication hubs, and water purification facilities. Within weeks, the hive forges were isolated from each other and facing critical resource shortages. When the Tech Guild leaders still refused to surrender, Perturabo demonstrated the consequences of continued resistance. He selected a single hive forge in Enkaladian Secundus, the smallest of the major manufacturing centers, and ordered its complete destruction. Iron Warriors breacher teams systematically demolished the facility level by level, salvaging useful technology but rendering the structure permanently uninhabitable. The message was clear: compliance or annihilation. The remaining tech guilds capitulated within days. Under Iron Warriors' occupation, Enkaladian was transformed into a productive forge world that supplied the Legion with specialized siege equipment and ammunition. A permanent garrison of the 12th Grand Company remained on the planet, ensuring continued compliance and overseeing production. This garrison duty would last for decades, with the assigned companies effectively cut off from the rest of the Legion and the greater glory of the Crusade. As the Great Crusade progressed, Perturabo's bitterness toward his assigned role grew increasingly evident. During strategic councils, he would argue for more prestigious assignments for his Legion, only to be overruled by the Warmaster or other high-ranking commanders who valued the Iron Warriors' expertise in grinding siege warfare. The Lord of Iron's resentment was further inflamed by the apparent favoritism shown to other Primarchs, particularly Rogel Dorn. The assignment of the Imperial Fists to fortify the Imperial Palace on Terra struck Perturabo as a deliberate slight. As the Imperium's preeminent master of fortification, he believed the honor should naturally have fallen to him. Instead, the Emperor chose Dorn, publicly declaring him the Praetorian of Terra and entrusting him with the defense of the throne world. This decision reinforced Perturabo's growing conviction that his Legion's sacrifices went unrecognized and unappreciated. This sense of being undervalued extended beyond mere matters of prestige. The Iron Warriors consistently received lower priority for equipment resupply, mechanicum support, and fleet assets than legions like the Ultramarines or Luna Wolves. When Perturabo requisitioned specialized siege equipment or requested reinforcement for depleted companies, his requests were often delayed or denied due to higher strategic priorities. Meanwhile, the Imperial Fists received newly developed Terminator armor patterns and Stormbird gunships directly from Martian forges. The Legion's high casualty rate compounded these logistical challenges. The attritional warfare that characterized Iron Warriors' operations resulted in steady losses that gradually eroded their fighting strength. While official Legion strength remained at nominal levels, the reality was that many Grand Companies operated at 70–80% capacity, with experienced veterans increasingly replaced by hastily trained neophytes. The psychological impact of watching battle brothers die in thankless siege operations, only to be replaced by raw recruits who would likely suffer the same fate, created a fatalistic culture within the Legion. Perturabo attempted to address these issues through increasingly draconian discipline. He instituted harsh penalties for failure, including public execution of officers who failed to meet objectives within specified timeframes. Training regimens became even more brutal, with live fire exercises resulting in actual casualties among neophytes deemed insufficiently prepared for combat. The Primarch personally reviewed after action reports from operations across the galaxy, dispatching his Triarchs to implement corrective measures when performance fell below his exacting standards. Rather than improving morale, these measures accelerated the Legion's psychological deterioration. Company commanders became risk-averse, prioritizing achievement of objectives over the lives of their men. Battle brothers viewed their commanders with suspicion rather than trust, knowing that officers might sacrifice them to avoid Perturabo's wrath. The brotherhood that formed the foundation of other legions' fighting strength was systematically eroded, replaced by a cold professionalism that viewed Astartes as expendable assets rather than irreplaceable warriors. The Iron Warriors' growing reputation for brutality further isolated them from their brother legions. Their approach to compliance actions typically involved overwhelming force and calculated atrocity rather than the more measured approaches favored by legions like the Ultramarines or Blood Angels. When faced with civilian resistance, Iron Warriors commanders would often implement decimation protocols, executing 1 in 10 civilians as an example to others. These tactics proved effective in securing compliance, but earned the Legion's censure from imperial authorities and disdain from their fellow Astartes. By the midpoint of the Great Crusade, the Iron Warriors had become a legion apart, feared for their effectiveness, but respected only grudgingly. Joint operations with other legions became increasingly rare, with imperial commanders preferring to assign the 4th Legion to independent actions where their methods would not conflict with those of their brothers. This operational isolation further reinforced Perturabo's perception that his legion was viewed as a tool to be used rather than warriors to be honored. The Primarch's relationship with his sons grew increasingly distant. Unlike commanders such as Horus or Sanguinius, who fought alongside their men and shared in their hardships, Perturabo increasingly isolated himself with his inner circle of triarchs and veteran officers. He spent hours studying campaign reports and strategic assessments, emerging only to issue new orders or pronounce judgment on those who had failed to meet his standards. His rare appearances before the rank and file were formal affairs characterized by rigid ceremony rather than the camaraderie that marked other Primarchs' interactions with their legions. This emotional distance reflected Perturabo's own inner turmoil. The Lord of Iron was caught between his desire for recognition and his growing conviction that such recognition would never come. He continued to drive himself and his legion to achieve the impossible, breaking sieges that had stalled other imperial forces and holding territories that should have fallen to enemy counterattack. Yet each success seemed only to lead to another thankless assignment, another grinding campaign, another decade of sacrifice without glory. The turning point came during a rare joint operation with the Imperial Fists on the world of Shravan. Both legions had been assigned to overcome the massive fortress cities of the silicon-based Badoon species. What should have been a showcase of Imperial siegecraft devolved into bitter competition, with both legions taking unnecessary risks to outperform the other. The campaign ended in victory, but at a cost. The Iron Warriors suffered nearly 3 times the casualties of the Imperial Fists, yet the official Crusade record credited Rogel Dorn with breaking the final fortress. When Perturabo read this report, something broke within him. He withdrew to his personal forge aboard his flagship Iron Blood for 7 days, refusing all communication and visitors. When he emerged, something had changed in the Primarch. His bitterness had hardened into cold resolve. If the Imperium would not recognize his legion's sacrifices, he would force them to acknowledge the Iron Warrior's worth. He began to implement new strategies and training protocols, preparing his legion for a role he had not yet revealed to them. As the Great Crusade entered its final decades, the Iron Warriors continued their assigned duties with grim efficiency. They broke sieges, garrisoned worlds, and expanded the Imperium's borders through calculated application of force. But beneath this outward compliance, Perturabo was systematically repositioning his forces, recalling scattered detachments and consolidating strategic assets. He cultivated relationships with the Mechanicum, securing production capacity on forge worlds like Incaladian that would operate outside normal Imperial supply chains. The Lord of Iron's plans remained opaque even to his closest advisors. Some speculated that he intended to demonstrate the Iron Warrior's true value through some spectacular victory that could not be ignored. Others feared he was preparing for a confrontation with his rival Rogel Dorn. None suspected the true scope of Perturabo's ambitions or the depths of his resentment toward the Emperor who had found him only to use him as the Great Crusade's grindstone. The seeds of Perturabo's betrayal were sown long before the first shots of the Horus Heresy were fired. After decades of thankless sieges and garrison duties, the mounting pressure within the Lord of Iron reached its breaking point when astropathic communications brought dire news from Olympia. The world that had raised him, though never loved him, had fallen into open rebellion against imperial rule. The Olympian uprising was not particularly unusual in the context of the Great Crusade. Many worlds chafed under imperial taxation and the cultural homogenization that compliance brought. What made this rebellion significant was that Perturabo had personally guaranteed Olympia's loyalty to the Emperor. The planet's defiance was not merely a strategic concern, but a personal humiliation for a Primarch already nursing deep wounds to his pride. Perturabo's response was immediate and absolute. Without requesting permission from the Warmaster or informing the Imperial command structure, he ordered all available Iron Warriors forces to divert to Olympia. Grand companies engaged in various campaigns across the galaxy abruptly abandoned their posts, leaving Imperial army units without Astartes support and ongoing sieges without their specialist commanders. The Iron Warriors descended upon Olympia with cold fury. The people who had once feared and respected the hammer of Olympia now faced his wrath not as a favored son, but as the Emperor's executioner. Perturabo deployed his legion with mathematical precision, surrounding the rebellious city-states and cutting off all routes of escape or reinforcement. There would be no negotiation, no acceptance of surrender, only compliance through absolute subjugation. What followed was not merely compliance, but annihilation. Iron Warriors' siege engines reduced ancient fortifications to rubble. Assault formations executed civilian populations en masse. Resistance was met with escalating brutality until entire districts were purged of human life. The city-state of Lakos, where Perturabo had been raised by his adoptive father Damikos, received especially harsh treatment, with the Primarch personally overseeing its systematic destruction. As the campaign progressed, even hardened Iron Warriors veterans were disturbed by the scale of the slaughter. This was not the calculated application of force they had practiced throughout the Crusade, but wanton extermination. Some officers quietly questioned the necessity of such brutality, though none dared voice these concerns to their Primarch. Perturabo, consumed by rage and shame, drove his legion to ever greater excesses, as if the blood of Olympia could wash away decades of perceived slights. By the time the massacre ended, nearly 5 million Olympians lay dead. The planet's infrastructure was shattered, its cultural treasures destroyed, and its remaining population reduced to terrified compliance. The Iron Warriors had not merely put down a rebellion, they had broken a world that held special significance to their own heritage and identity. In the aftermath, as the blood haze of combat faded, the full weight of what they had done settled upon the Legion. Many battle brothers experienced a profound psychological break, realizing they had slaughtered the very people they had once sworn to protect. Perturabo himself fell into a dark melancholy, withdrawing to his private chambers aboard the Iron Blood. For 7 days, he remained in isolation, emerging only when his triarchs reported the arrival of an imperial delegation. This delegation brought not commendation for restoring compliance, but censure for abandoning assigned war zones without authorization. The Emperor, through his representatives, demanded an explanation for the Legion's actions and the excessive force employed against a world that had posed no significant military threat to the Imperium. The message was clear: the Iron Warriors would face sanction for the Olympia massacre. For Perturabo, this was the final betrayal. After decades of thankless service, after countless Iron Warriors' lives spent in the Emperor's name, his legion would now be punished for dealing with a matter of personal honor. The bitter irony was not lost on him. Other Primarchs had been forgiven far greater transgressions, yet his legion would be censured for doing what they had been created to do: break resistance through overwhelming force. It was in this moment of bitter resentment that Horus's emissary arrived. The Warmaster, having already turned against the Emperor, recognized the opportunity presented by Perturabo's disgrace. The emissary brought not condemnation, but understanding, not punishment, but opportunity. Horus offered Perturabo what the Emperor never had: recognition, purpose, and the chance to finally unleash the full potential of his legion without the constraints of imperial oversight. Perturabo's decision to side with Horus was not made in haste. The Lord of Iron weighed his options with the same analytical precision he applied to siege warfare. He considered the strategic disposition of loyal and potentially treasonous forces, assessed the likelihood of victory, and calculated the costs of both rebellion and continued loyalty. In the end, his decision was as much pragmatic as emotional. The Iron Warrior skills would be valued by Horus in ways they never had been by the Emperor. the legion's reaction to Perturabo's announcement was complex. Some officers embraced the decision immediately, having harbored their own resentments toward imperial authority. Others accepted it out of loyalty to their Primarch, trusting his judgment even in treachery. A minority harbored private doubts but remained silent, knowing the fate that awaited those who questioned Perturabo's will. Only a small fraction, primarily those deployed on distant garrison duties who had not participated in the Olympia massacre, actively rejected the turn to Horus and remained loyal to the Emperor. With his legion committed to Horus's cause, Perturabo turned his analytical mind to the strategic requirements of rebellion. The Iron Warriors' expertise in siege warfare would be invaluable in the coming conflict, but first, they would need to eliminate potential threats to Horus's flanks. This calculation led directly to one of the most infamous betrayals in Imperial history, the drop site massacre of Istvan V. The plan for Istvan V exemplified Perturabo's strategic genius, even as it revealed the depths of his moral corruption. 7 legions were dispatched to bring Horus to justice. The Salamanders, Iron Hands, and Raven Guard would form the first wave, while the Iron Warriors, Alpha Legion, Word Bearers, and Night Lords would constitute the second wave. The Loyalists believed this overwhelming force would quickly crush the rebellion. They could not conceive that 4 entire legions would betray their oaths to the Emperor. As the first wave made planetfall and engaged Horus's forces, they found themselves facing unexpected resistance. The traitor forces had prepared formidable defensive positions and fought with desperate ferocity. The Loyalists pushed forward nevertheless, believing that the arrival of the second wave would turn the tide decisively in their favor. When Vox signals indicated the arrival of their reinforcements, the battered first wave fell back toward the designated landing zones, expecting relief and resupply. Instead, they found betrayal. As the Iron Warriors' dropships and landing craft descended, their gunports opened not on Horus's forces, but on the Loyalist rear areas. Perturabo had positioned his forces with cold efficiency, creating interlocking fields of fire that caught the retreating Loyalists in devastating crossfires. Iron Warriors' heavy weapons teams had pre-calculated firing solutions for maximum effect, while assault formations stood ready to eliminate any organized resistance that survived the initial barrage. The massacre was as swift as it was complete. Caught between Horus's forces to their front and the betrayers to their rear, the Loyalist legions were systematically annihilated. Iron Warriors' Terminator squads hunted down and eliminated Loyalist command groups, while artillery batteries pounded identified rally points to prevent any cohesive resistance from forming. Perturabo personally led a strike force against Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, though it was Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children who would ultimately claim the Loyalist Primarch's head. In the aftermath of Istvan V, as the traitor legions consolidated their positions and processed prisoners, Perturabo conducted a thorough assessment of the operation. The Iron Warriors had performed with clinical efficiency, suffering minimal casualties while inflicting devastating losses on the Loyalists. More importantly, the elimination of 3 loyal legions as effective fighting forces had significantly altered the strategic balance of the coming civil war. Horus now held a decisive advantage in Astartes' forces, allowing him to pursue his planned offensive toward Terra with reasonable confidence of success. This cold analysis typified Perturabo's approach to the heresy. Unlike Primarchs such as Angron or Fulgrim, who embraced chaos out of rage or obsession with perfection, the Lord of Iron viewed his betrayal primarily in strategic terms. The Iron Warriors had not rebelled out of religious conviction or ideological fervor, but from a calculated assessment that Horus offered better prospects than the Emperor. This pragmatic treachery made them particularly valuable to the War Master's War Council, where Perturabo's voice became increasingly prominent. In the strategic deliberations that followed Istvan, Perturabo argued forcefully for a direct assault on Terra. He maintained that the Imperium's defenses were still disorganized, and that a swift strike at the heart of Imperial power could end the war before the Loyalists could consolidate their remaining strength. This position put him at odds with Lorgar and the Word Bearers, who advocated for a more methodical approach that would secure potential Loyalist strongholds before advancing on the throne world. Horus ultimately adopted elements of both strategies, dispatching portions of his forces to neutralize potential threats while maintaining his focus on the path to Terra. The Iron Warriors were assigned to eliminate key fortress worlds that might otherwise threaten the trader's supply lines or serve as bases for loyalist counterattacks. These assignments played perfectly to the Legion's strengths, allowing them to employ their siege expertise against the very defensive systems many of them had helped design during the Great Crusade. As the heresy progressed, Perturabo's role in Horus's inner circle evolved. The War Master increasingly relied on the Lord of Iron's analytical mind and siege expertise for strategic planning. When the time came to plan the Solar War, the final push into the heart of the Imperium, Perturabo's input proved invaluable. He had studied the Sol system's defenses extensively during the Great Crusade, often comparing his theoretical approaches to the actual fortifications implemented by Rogel Dorn. This knowledge allowed him to identify vulnerabilities that other traitor commanders might have overlooked. The Iron Warriors' contributions to the Solar War went beyond mere strategic advice. Perturabo committed significant Legion resources to the campaign, including specialized siege units equipped with modified weapons designed specifically to overcome Imperial defensive systems. Iron Warriors' Tech Marines developed armor-piercing munitions calibrated to penetrate the reinforced bulkheads of solar fortifications, while their destroyer squads deployed experimental toxins against garrison forces. Throughout these operations, a subtle change was occurring within the Legion. Their initial pragmatic betrayal was gradually giving way to something darker. The Iron Warriors had always been susceptible to bitterness and resentment, but their exposure to Chaos forces accelerated these tendencies. Many battle brothers began modifying their armor with disturbing trophies and sigils, while others reported disturbing dreams of towers and fortresses built from impossible materials. Perturabo himself seemed increasingly obsessed with arcane knowledge, spending hours studying forbidden texts acquired from Wordbearer's archives. This corruption manifested most visibly in the Legion's approach to warfare. Always brutal, the Iron Warriors now incorporated elements of psychological terror that went beyond tactical necessity. Prisoners were no longer merely executed, but subjected to elaborate tortures designed to break morale among defenders. Iron Warriors' siege works began to incorporate disturbing architectural elements that seemed designed to channel unknown energies rather than merely provide tactical advantages. The most significant transformation occurred in their relationship with technology. Always skilled artificers, Iron Warriors' Tech Marines began experimenting with unholy fusion of warp energies and machine systems. Their siege engines incorporated demonic essences that granted them unnatural resilience and destructive potential. Dreadnoughts housing the Legion's fallen warriors reported increasing difficulty distinguishing between reality and nightmare, their mechanical systems influenced by the same warp energies that corrupted their organic components. Despite these changes, the Iron Warriors maintained a facade of rational calculation that distinguished them from more obviously corrupted legions like the World Eaters or Emperor's Children. Perturabo himself rejected obvious physical mutation, purging battle brothers who displayed too visible signs of Chaos favor. This was not out of loyalty to Imperial ideals, but pragmatic recognition that controlled corruption was more useful than surrendering entirely to Chaos. This controlled approach to Chaos made the Iron Warriors particularly dangerous as the traitor forces pushed deeper into the solar system. While Imperial defenders could easily recognize the threat posed by frothing Cornate berserkers or noise-addled Emperor's Children, the Iron Warriors presented a more insidious danger. They fought with disciplined precision that mimicked loyal Astartes' tactics while incorporating subtle corruptions that gave them advantages no loyal force could match. As Horus's forces approached Terra itself, Perturabo's obsession with defeating Rogel Dorn reached new heights. The Lord of Iron had spent decades studying his rival's defensive doctrines, identifying potential weaknesses and developing countermeasures. Now, with the ultimate siege, the assault on the Imperial Palace within reach, Perturabo committed his legion's full resources to ensuring Dorn's defenses would fail when put to the ultimate test. The Iron Warriors' arrival in the Sol system marked the beginning of what would become their defining campaign, the Siege of Terra. Perturabo had spent years preparing for this moment, meticulously studying the defenses of the Imperial Palace and developing countermeasures for each layer of fortification his hated rival Rogel Dorn had constructed. For the Lord of Iron, the siege represented more than just the culmination of Horus's rebellion. It was the ultimate test of his siegecraft against Dorn's defensive genius. As the traitor fleet established orbit around Terra, Perturabo convened his senior officers aboard the Iron Blood. The chamber was dominated by a massive hololithic projection of the Imperial Palace complex, showing every bastion, gate, and defensive position in exacting detail. The Iron Warriors had compiled this intelligence through various means: analysis of architectural plans from the Great Crusade era, information extracted from captured Imperial officers, and data gathered by infiltrators who had accessed portions of the palace before the heresy erupted. Perturabo's initial assessment identified three critical vulnerabilities in Dorn's defenses. First, the Eternity Wall spaceport, while heavily fortified, had structural weaknesses in its eastern quadrant where newer fortifications connected to ancient Terran structures. Second, the Saturnine Gate, though one of the most formidable entry points, relied heavily on overlapping fields of fire that could be neutralized if attackers gained control of specific adjacent positions. Third, the underground infrastructure beneath the Sanctum Imperialis contained maintenance tunnels that, while heavily sealed, could potentially be breached using specialized mining equipment. The Iron Warriors' approach to the siege differed significantly from the other traitor legions. While the World Eaters demanded immediate frontal assaults, and the Emperor's children sought to indulge their new sensory obsessions among Terra's civilian population, Perturabo insisted on methodical preparation. Iron Warriors' advance teams established forward operating bases in the ruins surrounding the palace, from which they conducted detailed surveys of the defenses. Specialized auspex arrays measured the thickness of walls, identified power conduits for void shield generators, and mapped subterranean structures. Based on this intelligence, Perturabo developed a comprehensive siege plan that assigned specific roles to each traitor legion. The Iron Warriors would focus on breaching the palace's outer defenses through a combination of artillery bombardment and sapper operations. The Death Guard would deploy in strength against the Eternity Gate, using their unnatural resilience to absorb the defenders' fire while advancing steadily forward. The Sons of Horus would be held in reserve for exploitation, ready to pour through any breach the other legions created. The siege began with an artillery barrage of unprecedented scale. Iron Warriors' siege batteries had been positioned at mathematically optimal distances from the palace walls, their firing solutions calculated to maximize destructive potential while minimizing exposure to counter battery fire. Hundreds of Basilisk artillery tanks, Medusa siege guns, and Typhon heavy siege tanks opened fire simultaneously, their shells impacting against the palace's void shields in a continuous thunder that would not cease for the duration of the siege. This initial bombardment served multiple purposes. Beyond the obvious goal of weakening the palace defenses, it provided cover for Iron Warriors' infiltration teams deploying forward observation posts and targeting arrays. These small units, often consisting of just 2 or 3 Astartes, established themselves in ruins with direct line of sight to key defensive positions. From these vantage points, they could call in precision strikes against targets of opportunity and report on defender movements. Perturabo personally oversaw the deployment of specialized siege engines of his own design. These included the Tormentor cannons, massive artillery pieces whose shells contained not only high explosives, but also psychoactive compounds that induced terror and confusion in those near the impact site. Iron Warriors' Tech Marines had calibrated these weapons to target areas where Auspex scans indicated high concentrations of unaugmented human defenders, maximizing their psychological impact. Perhaps most insidious were the Legion's siege trenches. Unlike conventional approach trenches, the Iron Warriors' excavations followed patterns derived from forbidden mathematical formulas. Viewed from orbit, these trench networks formed complex geometric patterns that subtly distorted the local warp interface. Defenders stationed opposite these positions reported increasing incidents of nightmares, hallucinations, and inexplicable equipment failures as the siege progressed. The first major breakthrough came on the 6th day of the siege. Iron Warriors sappers, operating beneath the cover of an intense artillery barrage, successfully breached the outer curtain wall near the Helios Gate. Using melta charges placed at structurally calculated weak points, they created a gap approximately 20 meters wide. Perturabo immediately committed his Terminator elite, the Iron Circle, to exploit this opportunity. These heavily armored veterans secured the breach against Imperial counterattacks, establishing a foothold from which further operations could be launched. Dorn's response was swift and characteristically direct. Imperial Fist's Terminators, supported by elements of the Blood Angels, launched a determined counter-assault to seal the breach. The fighting in this narrow corridor became some of the most brutal of the entire siege. Iron Warriors Terminators, their tactical doctrine emphasizing close-quarters firepower, established interlocking fields of fire that cut down waves of loyalist attackers. When ammunition ran low, the combat devolved into a grinding melee where power fists and chain weapons clashed in the confined space. After 3 days of continuous fighting, the Loyalists succeeded in containing the breach but could not fully reclaim it. The result was a bloody stalemate that tied down significant Imperial forces, preventing their deployment elsewhere. Perturabo considered this an acceptable outcome. The operation had forced Dorn to commit reserves that might otherwise have been held for later stages of the siege. With the Helios Gate operation ongoing, Perturabo shifted focus to his second objective, the Eternity Wall spaceport. This massive complex, which had once received ships from across the Imperium, had been transformed by Dorn into a formidable bastion. Its landing pads now supported anti-aircraft batteries, while its cargo terminals had become bunker complexes housing thousands of defenders. Rather than attempting a direct assault on the spaceport itself, Perturabo targeted the water reclamation facilities that supplied it. Iron Warriors infiltrators, operating through the underhive areas surrounding the palace, planted demolition charges at key points in the aqueduct system. When detonated, these explosives not only cut off water supplies, but also created flooding in lower levels that damaged power distribution systems. With the spaceport support infrastructure compromised, Perturabo launched a coordinated attack from 3 directions simultaneously. Iron Warriors assault companies, supported by traitor Titan Legion elements, advanced under the cover of smoke and debris clouds created by preliminary bombardment. They employed mobile siege shields, massive armored barriers mounted on tracked chassis, to provide cover for advancing infantry against the Imperial defensive fire. The eastern approach, where Perturabo had identified structural weaknesses, became the focus of the Legion's most elite formations. Terminator squads equipped with specialized breaching equipment methodically cut through reinforced bulkheads and defensive barriers. Behind them came destroyer squads armed with rad weapons and phosphex bombs, tasked with clearing defensive positions through the most horrific means available. As the Iron Warriors penetrated deeper into the spaceport complex, they encountered increasingly desperate resistance. Imperial Fist's defenders had prepared fallback positions with overlapping fields of fire, forcing the attackers to clear each chamber and corridor individually. Progress slowed to a meter-by-meter advance, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The Iron Warriors responded by bringing forward dreadnoughts specially configured for confined space combat, their weapon loadouts optimized for the close quarters fighting within the spaceport's maintenance tunnels. After 8 days of continuous combat, the Iron Warriors secured approximately 60% of the spaceport complex. This partial victory allowed them to establish artillery positions with direct lines of fire against the inner palace, significantly enhancing the effectiveness of their bombardment. More importantly, it prevented the Loyalists from using the spaceport as a staging area for potential reinforcements from orbit. Throughout these operations, Perturabo maintained constant communication with his field commanders through a secured Vox network. Unlike some Primarchs who led from the front, the Lord of Iron directed the siege from a mobile command center that could be relocated as tactical situations evolved. This command post contained advanced augury equipment that compiled data from hundreds of battlefield sensors, allowing Perturabo to maintain a comprehensive understanding of the entire siege operation. This strategic oversight proved crucial when Dorne launched a major counteroffensive aimed at reclaiming the spaceport. Detecting unusual troop movements through seismic monitors placed by forward observers, Perturabo correctly anticipated the Imperial Fist's assault axis. He ordered the repositioning of heavy weapons teams to cover likely approach routes and deployed reserve companies to reinforce potentially vulnerable sectors. When the Loyalist attack came, it struck fortified positions rather than the weak points Dorne had intended to exploit. Iron Warrior's heavy bolter teams cut down advancing Imperial Fist squads, while pre-sighted artillery dropped shells with pinpoint accuracy on enemy concentration areas. The counterattack faltered, then collapsed entirely when Iron Warrior's reserve elements struck the Imperial Fist's exposed flank. This defensive victory demonstrated Perturabo's mastery of siege warfare from both perspectives. He understood not only how to attack fortifications, but also how to defend captured ground against determined counterattacks. This comprehensive expertise gave the Iron Warriors a significant advantage over other traitor forces, who often lacked the discipline to hold territory they had taken. As the siege progressed into its second month, Perturabo's attention turned to the Saturnine Gate, one of the most heavily defended entry points to the inner palace. Direct assault against this position would be prohibitively costly, so the Lord of Iron developed an alternative approach. Analyzing ancient architectural plans, he identified a network of maintenance tunnels beneath the gate complex that had been sealed but not completely destroyed during Dorne's fortification efforts. Iron Warriors' Terminator squads equipped with specialized drilling equipment began excavating these tunnels, working in complete radio silence to avoid detection. The operation proceeded slowly, with engineering teams reinforcing the tunnel network against potential collapse as they advanced. Perturabo calculated that a force of approximately 200 Terminators, emerging directly beneath the Saturnine Gate's inner defenses, could disable key systems and create a vulnerability for the main assault force to exploit. The operation at Saturnine would become one of the most controversial episodes of the siege. Imperial records claim that Dorne anticipated Perturabo's strategy and prepared a devastating trap, while Iron Warriors' accounts insist that Loyalist forces received warning through unknown means. What is certain is that as the Terminators breached the final barrier and entered the underchambers of the Saturnine Gate, they encountered not the skeleton garrison they expected, but a full company of Imperial Fist's Terminators supported by Legio Custodes elements. The resulting battle in the confined spaces beneath Saturnine was apocalyptic. With both sides deployed in Terminator armor, the combat devolved into a point-blank firefight followed by brutal melee. Loyalist defenders had prepared the battlefield with pre-positioned charges that collapsed sections of the tunnel network, isolating Iron Warrior squads and preventing them from supporting each other. Despite this disadvantage, the traitors fought with typical determination, inflicting significant casualties on the defenders before being overwhelmed. The failure at Saturnine represented the first major setback for the Iron Warriors during the siege. Nearly 80% of the Terminator force was lost, including several senior officers who had served with Perturabo since the Great Crusade. The survivors reported directly to their Primarch, expecting punishment for their failure. Instead, Perturabo responded with cold analysis, interrogating them about defensive positions, Loyalist equipment, and tactics observed during the operation. This intelligence would inform his next strategic moves. Rather than dwelling on the Saturnine failure, Perturabo redirected his legion's efforts toward the Mercury Wall, a secondary defensive line that had received less attention from Dorne due to its position behind more prominent defenses. Iron Warrior's reconnaissance had identified potential weaknesses in this structure, particularly at junctions where newer fortifications connected to ancient Terran buildings that predated the palace complex. The assault on the Mercury Wall began with a diversionary attack against the much stronger Delphic Gate, drawing Loyalist reserves away from the actual target. Once these forces were committed, the main Iron Warriors assault group struck at 3 distinct points along the Mercury Wall simultaneously. Each attack was preceded by the detonation of massive subterranean charges, placed by infiltration teams in the days prior, creating breaches that assault formations immediately exploited. This operation demonstrated the Iron Warriors' ability to learn and adapt. Having observed the effectiveness of Loyalist ambushes during the Saturnine operation, Perturabo incorporated similar tactics into his own battle plan. The first Iron Warriors units through each breach deliberately advanced beyond their sustainable positions, creating the appearance of an overextended force. When Imperial counterattacks developed, they encountered pre-positioned heavy weapons teams in prepared firing positions, suffering devastating casualties. By the siege's third month, the combined traitor forces had established footholds in multiple sectors of the palace perimeter. The Iron Warriors held the most significant gains, having secured portions of the Eternity Wall spaceport, breached the Mercury Wall in 3 locations, and established artillery positions with direct lines of fire against the inner palace. These achievements came at tremendous cost. The Legion had suffered approximately 30% casualties, with several grand companies reduced to half strength or less. Despite these losses, the Iron Warriors maintained combat effectiveness through ruthless efficiency. Wounded Astartes who could not quickly return to battle were rendered down for progenite extraction. Their gene seed used to create new warriors through accelerated implantation procedures. Equipment from the dead was immediately redistributed to the living, while damaged vehicles were cannibalized to keep others operational. This practical approach to attrition, though brutal, allowed the Legion to sustain combat operations far longer than would otherwise have been possible. As the siege reached its critical phase, Perturabo's coordination with other traitor Primarchs became increasingly strained. The Lord of Iron's methodical approach conflicted with Angron's desire for direct assault and Fulgrim's increasingly erratic behavior. Only Mortarion of the Death Guard shared Perturabo's appreciation for the siege's complexity, though the 2 Primarchs disagreed on specific tactical approaches. The embers of the Horus Heresy had barely cooled when Perturabo engineered what would become one of the most devastating traps in Astartes' history. The Siege of Terra had ended not with the Iron Warriors' triumph, but with Horus's death and the traitors' retreat. As the fractured legions fled to the Eye of Terror, Perturabo's analytical mind was already formulating a plan that would serve multiple purposes: to bloody the Imperial fists, to exact revenge upon Rogel Dorn, and to secure his ascension to demonhood. The planet Sebastus IV, an unremarkable world in the Segmentum Obscurus, became the setting for this meticulously planned confrontation. Known to history as the Iron Cage, this battle would cement the eternal hatred between the Iron Warriors and Imperial fists, while showcasing Perturabo's tactical brilliance at its most malevolent. Sebastus IV had been an Iron Warriors fortress world during the Great Crusade, one of many outposts established to maintain Imperial compliance in conquered territories. When the heresy erupted, the garrison declared for Horus, reinforcing their already substantial defenses. As the traitors retreated after the Siege of Terra, Perturabo ordered significant Legion resources diverted to Sebastus IV, transforming the planet into an elaborate trap specifically designed to exploit Rogel Dorn's psychological state. The Lord of Iron understood his brother's mentality with uncomfortable precision. Dorn was devastated by the Emperor's grievous wounding and racked with guilt over his perceived failure to adequately defend the Imperial Palace. More significantly, Dorn's naturally stoic character had fractured under the weight of these events, leaving him consumed by a need for vengeance against the traitors who had brought such ruin to the Imperium. Perturabo's preparations on Sebastus IV reflected this deep understanding of his adversary. Rather than creating a conventional fortress designed to withstand attack, he crafted an elaborate maze of trenches, bunkers, and redoubts that formed a massive tactical puzzle. The defensive network covered hundreds of square kilometers, with each component positioned to lead attackers deeper into increasingly deadly kill zones. The outer perimeter featured relatively light defenses, enough to offer resistance but not so formidable as to discourage assault. These defenses were deliberately designed with apparent weaknesses that would tempt an aggressive attacker. Bunkers positioned with seemingly vulnerable flanks, trench networks with obvious enfilade positions, artillery emplacements with apparent blind spots, Each flaw was carefully calculated to draw Imperial fists into the next layer of the trap. Behind these outer works lay the true killing grounds. Interlocking fields of fire covered every approach, with heavy weapons positions concealed in hardened bunkers that could withstand direct artillery hits. Predator tanks and Vindicator siege tanks were dug into hull-down positions, their signatures masked by sophisticated dampening equipment. Minefields were laid according to psychological patterns, designed to funnel attackers into pre-sighted fire zones rather than simply deny territory. The Iron Warriors deployed their forces in depth throughout this defensive network. Rather than concentrating their strength at critical points, they distributed their units to ensure that Imperial Fist's advances would continuously encounter fresh resistance. Tactical reserves were positioned to counter specific breakthrough scenarios that Perturabo had calculated as most probable, with dedicated reaction forces assigned to each sector. Communication systems throughout the Iron Cage reflected Perturabo's obsession with redundancy. Primary Vox networks were backed by secondary systems, which were themselves supported by tertiary options, including hard-wired communication lines buried meters below the surface. Command and control bunkers were distributed throughout the defensive network, ensuring that the loss of any single headquarters would not compromise overall coordination. Perhaps most insidious were the psychological aspects of the Iron Cage's design. Throughout the defensive network, the Iron Warriors positioned evidence of Imperial Fist's casualties, damaged armor pieces, weapons, and in some cases actual remains recovered from the Siege of Terra. These grim trophies were placed where advancing Imperial Fists would encounter them, a constant reminder of previous defeats designed to provoke emotional rather than tactical responses. The Iron Warriors also prepared specialized weapons designed specifically to counter Imperial Fist's equipment and tactics. Having fought alongside and against Dorn's Legion for centuries, Perturabo understood their reliance on certain patterns of power armor, their preferred defensive formations, and their typical assault protocols. Heavy weapons were calibrated for optimal performance against Mark IV Maximus armor, the pattern most commonly used by the Imperial Fists. Defensive positions were oriented to maximize effectiveness against the disciplined squad-level tactics favored by Dorn. When intelligence reports confirmed that Rogel Dorn was personally leading a punitive expedition against Sebastus IV, Perturabo knew his trap was ready to be sprung. The Imperial Fists approached the Iron Cage with overwhelming force, nearly the entire legion committed to what Dorn believed would be a decisive blow against one of the most hated traitor legions. Preliminary orbital scans revealed the extensive defensive networks, but rather than deterring Dorn, the apparent challenge only strengthened his determination to bring Perturabo to battle. The initial Imperial Fists landings targeted what appeared to be weakly defended sectors in the outer perimeter. Drop pods and Thunderhawk gunships delivered thousands of Astartes directly into the defensive network, establishing footholds from which the main assault could be launched. These initial forces encountered moderate resistance, enough to cause casualties, but not enough to suggest a major trap. Early progress was steady, with Imperial Fists breaching the first defensive lines within hours of landing. This early success was precisely what Perturabo had anticipated. As the Imperial Fists pushed deeper into the defensive network, they encountered increasingly stubborn resistance. Iron Warriors' tactical squads conducted disciplined fighting withdrawals, falling back to prepared positions after inflicting casualties. Each withdrawal drew the attackers deeper into the maze, separating units from one another and disrupting the Imperial Fist's normally cohesive command structure. By the third day of battle, the true nature of the Iron Cage was becoming apparent to the Imperial Fist's command staff, if not to Dorn himself. The Legion had penetrated approximately 20 kilometers into the defensive network, but had suffered disproportionate casualties for each kilometer gained. More concerning, their formations had been drawn apart by the labyrinthine nature of the fortifications, with companies losing contact with adjacent units and battalion-level coordination becoming increasingly difficult. Perturabo's defensive design revealed its true brilliance in this fragmentation of the attacking force. Each Imperial Fists unit found itself fighting what seemed to be an isolated battle, unable to support or receive support from nearby forces. This isolation prevented the concentration of force that might have overwhelmed individual defensive positions, forcing the attackers to engage the Iron Warriors on unfavorable terms throughout the battlefield. The fourth day brought the first major counterattacks. Iron Warriors' reserves, which had been carefully husbanded during the initial phases, struck at Imperial Fists units that had become separated from the main force. These attacks were not designed to destroy the isolated units, but to force them to consume ammunition and supplies at an accelerated rate. Iron Warriors' squad leaders had strict orders to break contact before suffering significant casualties, reinforcing the attritional nature of Perturabo's strategy. As the battle progressed into its second week, the Imperial Fists found themselves in an increasingly desperate situation. Their casualties mounted steadily, ammunition ran low, and the anticipated breakthrough to Perturabo's central fortress remained elusive. The defensive network seemed to extend endlessly, each conquered position revealing new obstacles beyond. Worst of all, the Iron Warriors appeared to be suffering comparatively light casualties, with fresh troops consistently appearing to replace those lost in combat. The reality, which Dorn would only later comprehend, was that the Iron Cage had no central fortress, no final objective, no commanding position where Perturabo waited to be confronted. The entire defensive network was the trap, designed not to defeat the Imperial Fists in a decisive engagement, but to bleed them dry through thousands of small actions, each one carefully calculated to maximize Imperial casualties while preserving Iron Warrior's strength. Water became a critical factor as the battle entered its third week. The Imperial Fists had landed with standard combat loads, expecting a difficult but relatively brief campaign. As their supplies dwindled, they were forced to utilize local water sources, many of which had been contaminated by Iron Warrior's combat engineers. Though the Astartes' physiology could filter most toxins, the tainted water still reduced combat effectiveness and increased the strain on already overtaxed biological systems. The psychological pressure on the Imperial Fists intensified as the battle dragged on. Dorn's warriors were accustomed to decisive engagements with clear objectives, not the grinding attrition warfare at which the Iron Warriors excelled. The constant harassment, the inability to bring the enemy to decisive battle, and the growing realization that they had entered a trap all contributed to a gradual deterioration of morale, something previously unthinkable for the stoic 7th Legion. Rogel Dorn, however, refused to acknowledge the deteriorating situation. Driven by guilt over the Emperor's fate and hatred for the traitor legions, he continued to push his forces deeper into the Iron Cage, convinced that Perturabo must eventually be brought to battle. This fixation on personal confrontation with his brother blinded Dorn to the strategic reality that each day in the Iron Cage served Perturabo's purposes regardless of whether the two Primarchs ever met face to face. By the fourth week, the Imperial Fists had suffered catastrophic casualties. Approximately 400 battle brothers had been killed outright, with thousands more wounded severely enough to be combat ineffective. Ammunition for heavy weapons had been exhausted, forcing Astartes to rely on bolt pistols and combat blades against entrenched enemies with full supply chains. Some companies had been reduced to half strength or less, with command structures disrupted by the loss of veteran sergeants and captains. Throughout this ordeal, Perturabo maintained precise control over his forces from a mobile command center that relocated regularly to avoid detection. The Lord of Iron monitored the battle through an extensive network of observation posts and auspex arrays, adjusting his defensive deployments to channel the Imperial Fists into increasingly untenable positions. Each Iron Warrior squad had specific objectives and withdrawal criteria, ensuring that no unit was sacrificed unnecessarily to Dorn's desperate assaults. The battle reached its crisis point when Imperial sensors detected a substantial Ultramarines fleet entering the system. Robute Guilliman, now acting as Imperial Regent, had dispatched relief forces upon learning of Dorn's increasingly obvious strategic error. The Ultramarines' arrival presented Perturabo with a new calculation. While he could potentially continue to bleed the Imperial Fists, engaging a second, fresh legion would likely result in unacceptable Iron Warriors casualties. With characteristic pragmatism, Perturabo ordered a general withdrawal. Iron Warriors units disengaged systematically, falling back to prepared evacuation points where Stormbirds and Thunderhawks waited to extract them. The withdrawal was conducted with the same methodical precision as the defense, with rear guard units maintaining pressure on the Imperial Fists to prevent effective pursuit. Within 36 hours, the majority of Iron Warriors' forces had been evacuated, leaving behind a devastated battlefield strewn with Imperial Fists dead. The arrival of the Ultramarines found Rogel Dorn's legion in a state unprecedented in its history. The proud Imperial Fists had been reduced to scattered battle groups, many without effective command, fighting against an enemy that had already departed. Casualties approached 40% of the deployed force, with many more warriors suffering wounds that would require extensive treatment. Equipment losses were even more severe, with hundreds of suits of power armor damaged beyond field repair and dozens of vehicles abandoned due to fuel exhaustion or mechanical failure. Guilliman's forces secured the extraction of the Imperial Fists from Sebastus IV, an operation that Dorn initially resisted, but eventually accepted as militarily necessary. The Lord of Ultramar made no public criticism of his brother's decisions, but private communications between the Primarchs reportedly included Guilliman's assessment that the Iron Cage had been a monument to hubris that had nearly cost the Imperium an entire legion. For the Iron Warriors, the Iron Cage represented a vindication of their approach to warfare. With relatively minimal casualties, they had inflicted devastating losses on a legion of equal size and reputation. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of Perturabo's defensive doctrines and his deep understanding of psychological warfare. Perhaps most significantly, it provided the Lord of Iron with a massive sacrifice of Astartes' blood, both enemy and his own fallen, that would fuel his ascension to demonhood. This ascension occurred shortly after the Iron Warriors' withdrawal from Sebastus IV. Using arcane knowledge acquired during the heresy, Perturabo conducted elaborate rituals that channeled the psychic energy generated by the Iron Cage's slaughter. The exact nature of these ceremonies remains unknown to Imperial scholars, but the outcome is clear. Perturabo transcended his physical form, becoming a demon Primarch bound to no single chaos god, but to the ruinous powers in their undivided aspect. The strategic consequences of the Iron Cage extended far beyond the immediate casualties. The Imperial Fists required decades to rebuild their strength, during which their contribution to the Imperium's defense was significantly reduced. The battle also influenced Guilliman's development of the Codex Astartes, with the disaster serving as a powerful argument for the division of Legion strength forces into more manageable chapters that could not be lost in a single ill-conceived engagement. For the common battle brothers of both legions, the Iron Cage created a legacy of hatred that would endure for millennia. Imperial Fists Astartes developed specific training protocols focused on countering Iron Warriors' tactics, while the Traitor Legion incorporated trophies and iconography from the battle into their heraldry. When the two forces encountered each other in subsequent conflicts, the fighting invariably took on a ferocity that exceeded even the normal enmity between loyal and traitor Astartes. The Iron Cage also cemented the Iron Warriors' post-heresy tactical doctrine. The success of Perturabo's defensive strategy reinforced the Legion's focus on attritional warfare and psychological manipulation of enemies. Future Iron Warriors commanders would study the battle extensively, analyzing how Perturabo had exploited Dorn's psychological vulnerabilities to draw him into an unwinnable confrontation. The layered defenses, deceptive weaknesses, and depth-based resistance became hallmarks of Iron Warriors' operations throughout the long war against the Imperium. Following their retreat from the Iron Cage, the Iron Warriors withdrew to the Eye of Terror, that roiling wound in reality where the Immaterium bleeds into real space. Unlike other traitor legions who scattered to various demon worlds or degenerated into warring factions, Perturabo maintained remarkable control over his forces. His ascension to demonhood had not diminished his tactical genius or organizational skills, but had instead enhanced them with warp-granted insights into the fundamental architecture of reality itself. the Iron Warriors established their primary stronghold on the demon world of Medringard, a planet that would become the physical manifestation of Perturabo's will and vision. Unlike the pleasure palaces of the Emperor's children or the charnel houses of the World Eaters, Medringard was transformed into a monument to ordered corruption, a world-spanning network of fortresses, factories, and interconnected citadels that defied conventional physics while maintaining mathematical precision in their construction. At the heart of this nightmarish realm stood Perturabo's personal domain, the Fortress of Toil. This massive structure constantly reconfigured itself according to its master's whims, with walls that shifted position, towers that grew and retracted, and moats filled with substances that existed simultaneously as liquid metal and solidified warp energy. The fortress interior housed Perturabo's personal forge, laboratories, and a vast library containing technical schematics and forbidden knowledge accumulated over millennia of war. The Fortress of Toil was more than merely a defensive structure. It represented Perturabo's vision made manifest. Its architecture incorporated impossible geometries that strained the mind of any observer, yet maintained perfect structural integrity through equations that bridged the gap between material science and warp sorcery. Visitors reported that the fortress seemed to study them as they moved through its corridors, with walls imperceptibly adjusting to create a sense of disorientation or sudden exposure based on the psychological profile of the intruder. Throughout Medringard, the Iron Warriors established subsidiary fortresses, each controlled by a warsmith, the post-heresy equivalent of a Grand Company commander. These warsmiths maintained considerable autonomy in their operations, but remained ultimately answerable to Perturabo. Their fortresses reflected their individual approaches to warfare, with some favoring layered defensive systems, while others incorporated extensive manufacturing facilities or experimental laboratories. The most distinctive feature of Medringard was the seemingly endless construction. Vast slave populations toiled continuously to expand existing structures or build new fortifications according to ever-changing specifications. Unlike the mindless labor found on many demon worlds, this construction followed precise blueprints and engineering principles. Slaves who failed to maintain standards were not merely punished, but rendered down into raw materials for future building projects, their flesh converted to a form of living concrete that could be molded into load-bearing structures that moaned in eternal agony. This constant construction served multiple purposes. Beyond the practical value of expanding the Legion's fortifications, it reflected Perturabo's never-satisfied drive for perfection. The Demon Primarch would often order entire sections of fortress complexes demolished and rebuilt after detecting minor flaws invisible to anyone else. More significantly, the construction process itself generated specific patterns of suffering and despair that resonated with the warp, strengthening the Iron Warriors' connection to chaos while maintaining their independence from any single patron god. The Iron Warriors' relationship with chaos differed markedly from that of other traitor legions. Where the Death Guard had fully embraced Nurgle, or the Emperor's children had given themselves to Slaanesh, Perturabo maintained a pragmatic approach to the ruinous powers. He viewed chaos as a tool to be utilized rather than a master to be served, a source of power that could enhance the Legion's capabilities without compromising its fundamental identity or command structure. This pragmatism extended to the Legion's approach to mutation and demonic possession. Unlike the World Eaters, who increasingly surrendered their humanity to cornate bloodlust, or the Thousand Suns, who embraced their transformation into dust-filled automata, the Iron Warriors actively resisted uncontrolled mutation. Astartes who developed obvious physical corruptions were either relegated to specialized units like the Obliterators or subjected to techno-mechanical modifications that contained and weaponized their mutations. Perturabo established strict protocols for managing the warp's influence. Iron Warriors underwent regular assessment by specialized apothecaries and warpsmiths who monitored for signs of uncontrolled mutation or mental degradation. Those who showed excessive corruption without compensating tactical value were eliminated, their gene seed harvested for future implantation. This ruthless approach maintained the Legion's fighting effectiveness while preventing the descent into madness that afflicted many of their fellow traitors. The most significant development in the post-heresy Iron Warriors was their mastery of demon engines, unholy fusions of machine, flesh, and warp energy that combined the worst aspects of all three. The creation of these abominations required expertise in multiple disciplines: traditional engineering, warpcraft, and biological manipulation. The Iron Warriors excelled in this dark art, producing demon engines of unprecedented sophistication and battlefield effectiveness. This expertise led to the formation of a critical alliance with the Dark Mechanicum, those tech priests who had rejected the Omnissiah in favor of unrestricted technological exploration. The relationship between the Iron Warriors and these heretics was mutually beneficial. The Legion provided military protection and access to captured SDC fragments, while the Dark Mechanicum contributed advanced manufacturing capabilities and arcane technical knowledge that even Perturabo's genius could not match. Together, they established massive demon forges on Medrengard and other Iron Warriors' strongholds throughout the Eye of Terror. These facilities combined conventional manufacturing with blasphemous rituals that violated the fundamental laws of both physics and metaphysics. Within their smoke-belching confines, machines were not merely assembled but born, components fused with demonic essences through ceremonies that involved sacrifice, pain engines, and the manipulation of warp currents. The Defiler became the most recognizable product of these demon forges, a six-legged combat walker that combined the firepower of a battle tank with the close combat ferocity of a greater demon. Each Defiler contained a bound warp entity that provided both motive power and malevolent intelligence, allowing the construct to function without a conventional crew. The machine's weapon systems typically included battle cannons, heavy flamers, and massive power claws capable of shredding even Terminator armor. More terrifying were the Mauler Fiend's quadrupedal hunting constructs designed specifically for anti-armor operations. These predatory engines combined incredible speed with devastating close-range attack capabilities, using lasher tendrils and magma cutters to breach enemy vehicles before tearing apart the occupants. Unlike more conventional vehicles, Mauler Fiends displayed predatory behavior patterns, stalking targets and coordinating attacks with pack tactics that suggested disturbing intelligence. For siege operations, the Iron Warriors developed the Forge-Fiend, a heavy support variant that sacrificed mobility for ranged firepower. These constructs mounted multiple ectoplasma cannons, or Hades auto-cannons, providing devastating fire support while remaining protected by demon-infused armor plating that could self-repair when damaged. Like all demon engines, Forge-Fiends required regular feeding through battle and sacrifice to maintain their effectiveness, developing increasingly erratic behavior when deprived of violence. Beyond these standard patterns, Iron Warriors warsmiths created countless unique demon engines tailored to specific tactical requirements. These included burrowing machines capable of undermining enemy fortifications, aerial constructs that combined the worst aspects of insects and aircraft, and massive siege engines that incorporated components harvested from fallen titans. Each represented a perfect fusion of Perturabo's engineering genius with the reality-warping potential of the warp. The creation process for these abominations revealed much about the Iron Warriors' post-heresy mindset. Unlike conventional manufacturing, which followed standardized procedures to ensure consistent output, Demon Forge production incorporated elements of artistic expression and psychological imprinting. The emotional state of the Forge Master during critical binding rituals influenced the temperament of the resulting engine, while the specific torments inflicted on sacrificial victims determined certain performance characteristics. Warpsmiths, specialized Iron Warriors who combined the roles of Tech Marine, Sorcerer, and Torturer, oversaw these creation processes. These individuals underwent extensive modifications that blurred the line between Astartes and machine, with mechanical augmentations that allowed direct interface with both conventional technology and warp-infused constructs. Many developed symbiotic relationships with mechanical familiars, small demon engines that assisted in technical operations, while serving as external manifestations of their master's connection to the warp. The Iron Warriors' mastery of demon engine technology reflected their broader approach to warfare in the post-heresy era. Unlike legions that relied primarily on Astartes infantry, the Fourth Legion increasingly deployed mixed forces that combined traditional space marines with mechanical constructs and specialized units. This approach maximized combat effectiveness while managing the Legion's limited supply of gene seed, a critical consideration for a force engaged in a 10,000-year conflict with limited replenishment options. This pragmatic approach extended to the Legion's organizational structure. While maintaining the broad framework of grand companies, Perturabo implemented a system of specialized formations that could be attached to different commands based on tactical requirements. Siege companies specializing in fortification reduction, armored spearheads built around demon engines, and infiltration units trained in sabotage could all be reassigned between warsmiths to create force compositions tailored to specific missions. The fortress worlds controlled by the Iron Warriors within the Eye of Terror served as both defensive strongholds and launching points for raids into Imperial space. Each was designed according to Perturabo's defensive principles, with layered fortifications, interlocking fields of fire, and psychological elements intended to demoralize attackers. These worlds formed a network of mutually supporting positions that could channel enemy forces into prepared killing zones while maintaining secure supply lines between Iron Warriors' holdings. Among these fortress worlds, several achieved particular notoriety. Burgen's world featured massive orbital defense platforms that incorporated living rock harvested from sentient mountains, creating weapon systems that could anticipate enemy movements through a form of geological precognition. Kralkater was renowned for its temporal distortion fields, which allowed defenders to experience time at a different rate than attackers, providing critical reaction advantages during assaults. Forgefane hosted the largest concentration of demon forges outside Medrengard itself, producing war machines for distribution throughout the Legion. Despite their significant territorial holdings within the Eye of Terror, the Iron Warriors never succumbed to the static defensive mindset that might have been expected given their specialization. Instead, they maintained an aggressive operational tempo, regularly launching raids into Imperial space to capture slaves, technology, and raw materials. These operations typically targeted frontier worlds or isolated outposts, where the Legion could achieve local superiority before Imperial reinforcements arrived. The Iron Warriors' approach to these raids demonstrated their continued tactical sophistication. Rather than the terror attacks favored by Night Lords or the ritualistic massacres conducted by World Eaters, Iron Warriors' strikes followed precise operational plans with clearly defined objectives. Force composition was tailored to the specific target, combining conventional Astartes units with appropriate demon engine support. Extraction timelines were calculated based on projected Imperial response capabilities, with dedicated rearguard units assigned to cover withdrawal if necessary. Human slaves played a critical role in the Iron Warriors' post-heresy operations. Unlike some traitor legions who viewed mortals as merely food or playthings, the Iron Warriors maintained a highly stratified slave system that maximized utility. Technical specialists captured during raids might be implanted with control devices and assigned to maintenance duties, while physically robust specimens were used for labor or combat training. Even those unsuitable for other purposes served as raw materials for demon-binding rituals or biological components in certain types of war machines. The treatment of these slaves reflected the Legion's pragmatic cruelty. Useful individuals received sufficient sustenance and medical care to maintain their functionality, while those who failed to meet performance standards faced recycling through the flesh forges. This system created a desperate competition among slaves, who knew that demonstrating value was their only protection against being rendered down into component materials for the next generation of war machines. This ruthless efficiency extended to the Legion's approach to gene seed management. With their isolation from Imperial technology and limited access to appropriate surgical facilities, maintaining an adequate supply of progenitor glands became a critical concern. Iron Warriors apothecaries developed specialized techniques for harvesting gene seed from fallen battle brothers under combat conditions, while also experimenting with accelerated maturation processes that could reduce the time required for new implantation. The most radical development in this area was the creation of the Demonculaba, a horrific biological system designed to create new Chaos Space Marines without traditional gene seed limitations. This abominable process, pioneered by Warsmith Hansu, involved the transformation of female captives into grotesquely enlarged incubation chambers. Human adolescents would be sealed within these living wombs, their bodies forcibly transformed through a combination of chemical treatments, warp exposure, and stolen gene seed material. The resulting warriors often emerged as malformed abominations, but those who survived the process and met minimal standards could be further modified into functional Astartes equivalents. Unlike many traitor legions that fractured into disparate warbands after the heresy, the Iron Warriors maintained a remarkably coherent organizational structure throughout their long exile. This continuity stemmed directly from Perturabo's pragmatic nature and his understanding that discipline, even among servants of chaos, provided tactical advantages that blind devotion to the ruinous powers could not match. The foundation of the Legion's post-heresy structure remained the Grand Company, a formation that had existed since the Great Crusade but evolved to meet the challenges of the Long War. Each Grand Company functioned as a semi-autonomous military force under the command of a warsmith, a title that reflected the Iron Warriors' self-perception as craftsmen of war rather than merely its practitioners. These formations varied considerably in size, from several hundred Astartes in the most powerful companies to as few as 50 battle brothers in those that had suffered significant losses without adequate means of replenishment. The title of Warsmith carried tremendous weight within the Legion hierarchy. Unlike officers in Loyalist chapters who received their rank through a combination of merit and tradition, Warsmiths claimed their position through demonstrated competence and the ability to maintain control over their subordinates. The path to this rank typically involved decades or centuries of service, during which an aspirant needed to master not only conventional military tactics, but also the technical skills for which the Legion was renowned. A prospective warsmith needed to demonstrate proficiency in siege warfare, fortification design, and the creation and maintenance of demon engines. The relationship between warsmiths and their grand companies was fundamentally transactional. Battle brothers pledged loyalty not to an abstract ideal or even primarily to Perturabo, but to the warsmith whose competence offered the best chance of survival and conquest. This arrangement created a meritocratic system where ineffective leaders could find their forces melting away as warriors sought more capable commanders. The most successful warsmiths maintained their positions through a combination of military success, technical innovation, and calculated brutality that discouraged potential challengers. This pragmatic approach to leadership extended to the Grand Company's internal structure. Unlike the rigid organization found in Loyalist chapters, Iron Warriors formations adapted their composition based on available resources and operational requirements. Most maintained a core of traditional Astartes tactical and heavy support squads, supplemented by specialized units like Havocs, Terminators, and Obliterators. Around this core, warsmiths built complementary forces of cultists, demon engines, and slave soldiers that multiplied their combat effectiveness while preserving irreplaceable Astartes for critical operations. The autonomy granted to warsmiths created significant diversity in how different grand companies approached warfare. Some emphasized traditional Astartes infantry actions supported by heavy weapons, while others built their strategy around demon engines, with Astartes serving primarily as commanders and elite shock troops. Certain grand companies developed highly specialized capabilities, such as void warfare expertise or subterranean combat techniques, that made them valuable allies for more generalized forces. Despite this operational independence, Perturabo maintained ultimate authority through several mechanisms. The most important was his control over critical resources within the Eye of Terror. The primary demon forges, gene seed repositories, and warp transit routes between Iron Warriors' holdings all fell under the Demon Primarch's direct oversight. Warsmiths who defied his will might find their supply of replacement parts for demon engines suddenly restricted or their access to new recruits blocked. Perturabo further reinforced his authority through the deployment of personal representatives known as the Trident. These individuals, chosen for their absolute loyalty and exceptional abilities, served as the Primarch's eyes and hands throughout Legion territories. They carried the authority to commandeer resources from any grand company when acting in Perturabo's name, and could call multiple warsmiths to contribute forces for large-scale operations deemed critical to Legion interests. The relationship between different warsmiths was characterized by a complex mixture of competition and pragmatic cooperation. While each sought to increase their personal power and the capabilities of their grand company, they recognized that certain objectives required combined forces beyond what any single commander could field. This tension created a political environment where temporary alliances formed and dissolved based on shared interests, with careful accounting of debts and favors. Among the most powerful warsmiths of the post-heresy era, several achieved particular notoriety both within and beyond the Legion. Barban Falk, known simply as the Warsmith, commanded one of the largest grand companies and maintained particularly close ties to Perturabo himself. His forces specialized in siege warfare against Imperial fortress worlds, developing specialized equipment for breaching void shields and planetary defense systems. Falk's methodical approach to warfare reflected the Legion's traditional values, emphasizing careful preparation and overwhelming force applied at precisely calculated weak points. Foryx, once known as the first captain during the heresy, maintained significant influence despite the diminished size of his personal force. His expertise in defensive warfare made him invaluable during campaigns where the Iron Warriors needed to establish and hold territory, particularly when facing loyalist counterattacks. Foryx's defensive doctrines emphasized defense in depth, with multiple fallback positions and pre-planned counterattack routes that could turn apparent retreats into devastating traps. The most controversial figure in the Legion's modern hierarchy was undoubtedly Hansu, whose meteoric rise demonstrated both the meritocratic nature of Iron Warrior's advancement and the Legion's pragmatic approach to geneseed purity. Despite his mixed gene lineage, incorporating Imperial Fist's progenitor material harvested during the Iron Cage, Hansu achieved the rank of Warsmith through exceptional tactical acumen and ruthless ambition. His grand company became known for high-risk operations that yielded significant rewards, attracting battle brothers who valued success over tradition. Hansu's unconventional background created persistent tensions with more traditionalist elements within the Legion. Warsmiths who could trace their lineage directly to Heresy-era Iron Warriors often viewed him with suspicion, considering his partial Imperial Fists geneseed a fundamental corruption. These concerns intensified after Hansu's development of the Demonculaba process, which some veterans considered an unacceptable deviation from established Legion practices for creating new Astartes. This conflict came to a head during the Skull Harvest, where Hansu dramatically increased his power by absorbing the forces of defeated Chaos warbands. His subsequent campaign against Ultramar, a massive operation involving forces well beyond his original Grand Company, represented both the height of his influence and the beginning of significant pushback from rival warsmiths who viewed his independent actions as a potential threat to Legion cohesion. The political dynamics between warsmiths played out through various mechanisms beyond direct conflict. Control of specific forge worlds or demon engine production facilities represented significant leverage, as did access to stable warp routes for rapid deployment. Warsmiths cultivated relationships with the Dark Mechanicum, offering protection or captured technology in exchange for priority access to advanced weapon systems. These alliances often transcended individual grand companies, creating complex networks of obligation and dependency. Information represented another critical currency within Legion politics. Warsmiths maintained extensive intelligence networks both within the Eye of Terror and in Imperial space, gathering data on potential targets, rival activities, and shifting warp conditions. This intelligence was selectively shared or traded to secure advantages or forge temporary alliances. The most successful warsmiths developed reputations for possessing particularly accurate information, making them valuable partners for joint operations. Despite these internal politics, the Iron Warriors maintained significantly greater cohesion than most traitor legions. When facing external threats or pursuing objectives deemed critical by Perturabo, grand companies set aside their differences to present a unified front. This ability to coordinate large-scale operations gave the Iron Warriors a strategic flexibility that fragmented legions like the World Eaters or Emperor's Children could not match, allowing them to undertake campaigns that required sustained effort across multiple systems. The Legion's approach to recruitment and replenishment further distinguished them from their fellow traitors. While many Chaos warbands relied on capturing and corrupting loyalist Astartes, or creating flawed approximations through accelerated processes, the Iron Warriors maintained more systematic approaches. Grand companies established breeding programs on controlled worlds, identifying promising genetic stock and subjecting them to rigorous testing protocols. Those who survived preliminary screening underwent standard implantation procedures adapted to accommodate the Legion's corrupted gene seed. This methodical approach to creating new Astartes reflected the Iron Warriors' broader retention of organizational principles from their loyalist past. While other traitor legions abandoned imperial military doctrines in favor of increasingly demon-focused approaches, the Iron Warriors maintained training protocols, equipment standards, and tactical formations that would have been recognizable to their Great Crusade predecessors, albeit corrupted by 10 millennia of chaos influence. The hierarchy within individual grand companies similarly balanced traditional military structure with the realities of chaos influence. Most warsmiths maintained a formal command staff, including lieutenants responsible for specific aspects of operations, siege masters overseeing artillery and breaching assets, forge masters coordinating demon engine deployment, and captains commanding conventional Astartes formations. These positions were assigned based on demonstrated competence rather than seniority or favor, creating a professional command environment rare among chaos forces. Below this command level, the organization became more fluid, with battle brothers forming combat squads based on operational requirements rather than rigid unit designations. Veterans might lead these formations or operate independently, applying their experience where it could have the greatest impact. Specialists like Havocs or Obliterators typically deployed as dedicated support units, providing concentrated firepower to exploit breakthroughs or defend critical positions. The independence granted to warsmiths created natural tensions with Perturabo's centralized authority, particularly as the millennia passed and the demon Primarch's direct interventions became increasingly rare. Some grand companies operated for centuries without direct contact with their gene father, developing distinct tactical doctrines and internal cultures. This autonomy occasionally led to significant deviations from Legion norms, with certain warsmiths incorporating worship of specific chaos gods or adopting non-standard recruitment practices. Perturabo tolerated this diversity so long as it did not threaten Legion cohesion or his ultimate authority. Grand companies that achieved consistent results maintained considerable latitude in their internal affairs, while those that failed faced intervention from the Trident or even direct action by forces loyal to the Primarch. This balance between centralized control and operational autonomy created a resilient organizational structure that could absorb significant losses without collapsing. The endurance of this command structure over 10 millennia of exile represents one of the Iron Warriors' most remarkable achievements. While other traitor legions fragmented into competing warbands or fell under the domination of specific chaos gods, the Sons of Perturabo maintained a recognizable hierarchy that preserved their effectiveness as a military force. This continuity allowed them to accumulate technical knowledge, strategic intelligence, and material resources that more fractured forces could not match. The Iron Warriors' path through the millennia has been defined not only by their internal structures and technological innovations, but equally by their enduring enmities. Chief among these hatreds is the bitter feud with the Imperial Fists, a rivalry that transcends mere tactical opposition to form the core of the Iron Warriors' identity. This antagonism began during the Great Crusade, but crystallized into something far more visceral in the aftermath of the heresy. The roots of the Iron Warriors' Imperial Fists feud lie in their contrasting approaches to similar specialties. Both legions excelled in siege warfare, but while Rogel Dorn's sons approached fortification as an art form that expressed defiance and resilience, Perturabo's warriors viewed it as a mathematical problem to be solved through cold calculation. This philosophical divide was exacerbated by perceived favoritism shown to the 7th Legion, particularly the Emperor's appointment of Dorn as Praetorian of Terra. Following the heresy, this rivalry evolved from professional competition into existential hatred. The Iron Cage incident had demonstrated the depths of Perturabo's contempt for his brother and his legion, but it was merely the opening act in a 10,000-year vendetta. Throughout the Long War, Iron Warriors forces have consistently prioritized operations against Imperial Fist successors, often diverting significant resources to strike at these hated foes, even when tactical considerations might suggest other targets. This targeting manifests in multiple ways. Iron Warriors attack Imperial Fist's fortifications with particular ferocity, employing specialized weapons and tactics developed specifically to counter the 7th Legion's defensive doctrines. When facing Imperial Fists in battle, Iron Warriors commanders typically refuse battlefield withdrawals regardless of casualties, preferring to sustain significant losses rather than concede victory to their ancient rivals. Most disturbingly, captured Imperial Fists suffer fates far worse than the already grim treatment meted out to other Loyalist prisoners. The invasion of Hydra Cordatus in the 13th Black Crusade era exemplifies this obsession. Warsmith Hansu committed significant forces to assault this heavily fortified Imperial world, not primarily for its strategic value, but because it housed a secret Imperial Fists geneseed repository. The operation was conducted with typical Iron Warriors precision, preliminary bombardments to degrade defensive shields, followed by targeted drops of assault forces at mathematically determined weak points. The defending Adeptus Mechanicus forces, though well-equipped and determined, found themselves facing an enemy who had studied their defenses with obsessive detail and developed specific countermeasures for each layer of protection. Hansu's forces breached the primary fortress after 7 days of systematic assault, fighting through hardened defenders and automated security systems to reach the geneseed storage vaults. Rather than simply destroying this irreplaceable resource, the Iron Warriors carefully extracted the pure Imperial Fist's genetic material. This prize was transported back to Medringard, where Hansu used it in the creation of new Chaos Space Marines through the Demonculaba process, a final insult that perverted the very genetic legacy of Dorn's sons. The psychological dimension of this rivalry reveals much about the Iron Warriors' mentality. They do not merely seek to defeat the Imperial Fists, but to demonstrate intellectual superiority through the calculated dismantling of their defenses. Each fortress breached, each battle won becomes not just a military victory, but validation of Perturabo's approach to warfare over Dorn's. This need for vindication drives Iron Warriors to meticulous preparation when facing Imperial Fists, studying target fortifications for weeks or months to identify vulnerabilities that others might miss. This thoroughness extends to their knowledge of Imperial Fist's doctrine and equipment. Iron Warriors commanders maintain extensive intelligence files on Imperial Fist's chapter organization, preferred tactics, and equipment loadouts. They study after action reports from previous engagements, identifying patterns in how the Sons of Dorn respond to specific threats. This knowledge allows them to develop targeted counter tactics, such as specialized breaching formations, designed to overcome the interlocking defensive positions favored by Imperial Fist's commanders. The hatred extends to battlefield behavior that borders on ritualistic. Iron Warriors facing Imperial Fists often incorporate symbolic elements into their operations, such as desecrating Imperial Fist's iconography or broadcasting the torture of captured battle brothers on frequencies known to be monitored by loyalist forces. The psychological impact of these actions is calculated to provoke emotional responses that disrupt the disciplined defense for which the Imperial Fists are renowned. While the feud with the Imperial Fists represents the Iron Warriors' most defining rivalry, their relationship with the Ultramarines has developed into a hatred nearly as intense, particularly following Hansu's devastating campaign against Ultramar. This enmity differs fundamentally from the Imperial Fists' rivalry, where the latter is based on professional competition and perceived slights dating back to the Great Crusade. The conflict with the Ultramarines stems from more recent events and has a distinctly personal character. The seeds of this modern conflict were planted during the Gothic War, when Iron Warriors' forces encountered Ultramarines' detachments defending critical Imperial installations. These initial clashes were unremarkable by the standards of the Long War, but they caught the attention of warsmith Hansu, who noted the tactical flexibility and resource advantages enjoyed by the 13th Legion's successors. Unlike the straightforward defensive doctrines of the Imperial Fists, the Ultramarines presented a more complex challenge that appealed to Hansu's tactical creativity. This professional interest transformed into burning hatred following the events on Medringard, when Ultramarines Captain Uriel Ventress led a strike mission deep into Iron Warriors' territory that disrupted Hansu's Demonculaba operation. This unprecedented penetration of the Legion's primary stronghold represented not merely a tactical setback, but a profound humiliation for Hansu personally and the Iron Warriors generally. That a small force of loyalists could infiltrate their fortress world, overcome its defenses, and escape after causing significant damage challenged the Legion's self-image as masters of fortification. Hansu's response was characteristically disproportionate. Rather than treating the incident as a minor setback in the endless long war, he dedicated enormous resources to a campaign of vengeance that would become known as the Invasion of Ultramar. This operation represented a significant evolution in Iron Warriors' tactics, moving beyond their traditional focus on siege warfare to incorporate elements of terror, biological warfare, and psychological operations designed to undermine civilian morale. The campaign began with precision strikes against outlying systems, where Iron Warriors' forces overwhelmed planetary defenses before the Ultramarines could respond in force. Rather than occupying these worlds, Hansu's forces implemented what they termed strategic degradation, destroying critical infrastructure, contaminating water supplies with long-lasting toxins, and seeding agricultural areas with biological agents that would render them unusable for generations. These actions served no immediate military purpose, but formed part of a calculated strategy to stretch Ultramarines' response capabilities. As the campaign progressed toward Ultramar's core worlds, Hansu deployed the newborn, genetically engineered warriors created through the Demonculaba process, using stolen Imperial Fists gene seed. These abominations, though lacking the discipline and experience of true Astartes, provided disposable shock troops that could absorb the initial Ultramarines' counterattacks while preserving Hansu's veteran Iron Warriors for decisive engagements. Their very existence represented a calculated insult to both the Ultramarines and Imperial Fists, perverting the gene legacy of one legion to attack the realm of another. The most devastating phase of the campaign came with the deployment of the unfleshed, failed products of the Demonculaba that combined superhuman strength with bestial intelligence. These creatures were unleashed on civilian populations throughout Ultramar, creating terror and forcing the Ultramarines to divert significant forces to evacuation and protection operations, rather than confronting Hansu's main force directly. This approach reflected the Iron Warriors' pragmatic approach to warfare, recognizing that attacking civilian targets could yield greater strategic advantages than directly engaging the formidable Ultramarines' battle companies. Though ultimately repelled from Ultramar, the Iron Warriors inflicted damage that would take decades to repair. Agricultural worlds were rendered temporarily unusable, civilian casualties numbered in the millions, and critical infrastructure throughout the realm required extensive reconstruction. More significantly, the psychological impact on Ultramar's population created lingering effects that manifested in increased unrest, reduced productivity, and a general degradation of the efficiency for which Guilliman's realm was renowned. For the Iron Warriors, the campaign represented a significant evolution in their approach to the Long War. While they had always excelled at siege warfare and conventional military operations, Hansu's campaign demonstrated their ability to conduct theater-wide operations, incorporating multiple elements beyond direct force application. The targeting of civilian infrastructure, use of biological agents, and deployment of terror tactics showed an understanding of systemic warfare that many Chaos forces lacked. The conflict with the Ultramarines continues to influence Iron Warriors' operations, with many warsmiths incorporating lessons from Hansu's campaign into their own tactical approaches. Attacks on Imperial worlds now frequently target civilian support systems rather than military installations, creating cascading failures that complicate loyalist response efforts. The psychological dimension of warfare receives greater emphasis, with Iron Warriors' forces deliberately creating terror through calculated atrocities rather than indiscriminate slaughter. Beyond these prominent enmities, the Iron Warriors maintain complicated relationships with their fellow traitor legions. Their interaction with the Emperor's children exemplifies the complex dynamics at play. During the Great Crusade and early heresy, the two legions maintained cordial if distant relations, with their vastly different approaches to warfare rarely bringing them into direct cooperation or conflict. This changed dramatically during the Siege of Terra, where Perturabo's methodical assault plans were repeatedly undermined by Fulgrim's increasingly erratic behavior and his legion's pursuit of sensory experiences rather than strategic objectives. In the post-heresy era, this frustration hardened into contempt. Iron Warriors view the Emperor's children as undisciplined hedonists who have sacrificed military effectiveness for sensory indulgence. When forced to operate alongside Fulgrim's sons, Iron Warriors commanders typically establish strict operational boundaries, minimizing direct interaction while attempting to channel the Emperor's children's aggression toward tactically useful objectives. These arrangements frequently break down, with the Third Legion's unpredictability clashing with the Iron Warriors' need for precise execution. This contempt manifests most visibly during void operations, where Emperor's children vessels often disregard carefully planned attack patterns to pursue targets of opportunity that appeal to their commander's personal desires. Iron Warriors' ship captains have developed specialized communication protocols when operating in combined fleets, incorporating redundant command chains and contingency plans for when their nominal allies inevitably deviate from agreed strategies. Some warsmiths refuse outright to participate in joint operations with the Emperor's children, considering the tactical complications not worth any potential benefits. Despite this friction, pragmatic necessity occasionally forces cooperation between the legions. The Emperor's children maintain extensive networks within the Imperium's upper echelons, particularly among planetary governors and sector officials susceptible to promises of unprecedented pleasures. This intelligence can provide valuable targeting data for Iron Warriors' operations, identifying vulnerable worlds or specific weaknesses in Imperial defensive systems. In exchange, the Iron Warriors offer the Emperor's children access to their superior manufacturing capabilities, particularly for specialized weapons that can deliver unique sensory experiences to both wielder and victim. The relationship with the Word-Bearers presents different challenges. While the Iron Warriors respect the 17th Legion's discipline and organizational cohesion, they find their religious fervor incomprehensible and potentially dangerous. Perturabo's approach to chaos has always been pragmatic, viewing the ruinous powers as tools to be utilized rather than deities to be worshipped. This fundamental philosophical difference creates friction when the legions attempt joint operations, with word-bearers insisting on ritual observances that Iron Warriors consider wasteful diversions from tactical objectives. This tension manifests in competing approaches to conquered territories. When securing a captured world, Iron Warriors typically implement practical control measures, establishing defensive positions, exploiting local resources, and implementing systematic population control through calculated brutality. Word-bearers, by contrast, immediately begin conversion of the population through mass religious ceremonies, construction of dark temples, and sacrifice of those deemed spiritually unworthy. These divergent priorities have caused numerous operational failures, with neither legion willing to compromise their fundamental approach. Despite these differences, the Iron Warriors and Word-bearers find common ground in their shared emphasis on organization and discipline. Unlike the fractured warbands of the World Eaters or the solitary sorcerer lords of the Thousand Suns, both legions maintain coherent command structures that enable complex military operations. This organizational compatibility allows for effective coordination when both legions can agree on specific, limited objectives that accommodate their different priorities. The most productive collaborations typically involve sieges against heavily fortified Imperial worlds, where the Iron Warrior's technical expertise complements the Word-bearer's ability to undermine defender morale through psychological warfare. Iron Warriors provide the practical means to breach physical defenses, while Word-bearers' cultists infiltrate civilian populations, spreading fear and religious corruption that weakens resistance from within. When properly coordinated, this combination can overcome defenses that might withstand either legion operating independently. These complex rivalries and alliances have shaped Iron Warriors' tactics throughout the Long War. Their operations against Imperial space show clear targeting preferences influenced by ancient hatreds, with disproportionate resources dedicated to actions against Imperial Fists and Ultramarines holdings. Fortress worlds garrisoned by Imperial Fist successors face particularly methodical assaults, with Iron Warriors commanders employing their full technical expertise to systematically dismantle defenses designed by their ancient rivals. The post-heresy millennia have seen the Iron Warriors cement their reputation as among the most tactically adaptable and persistently dangerous of the traitor legions. Unlike the World Eaters, who devolved into fractured warbands of berserkers, or the Emperor's children, who disappeared into the pursuit of increasingly depraved sensations, the Sons of Perturabo maintained their military cohesion and strategic focus across 10,000 years of war against the Imperium. The First War for Armageddon in the year 444 of the 41st millennium demonstrated the Iron Warriors' continued effectiveness when operating alongside other Chaos forces. As Angron led his World Eaters in a direct assault against Imperial defensive positions, Iron Warriors' detachments under Warsmith Kronos adopted a more methodical approach. While the Blood God's followers drew Imperial attention with their berserker assaults, Kronos deployed specialized siege units to systematically neutralize key infrastructure across the Hive world. Iron Warriors' Vindicator squadrons targeted power distribution nodes with pinpoint accuracy, while their Havoc teams eliminated communication relays that coordinated Imperial defensive efforts. This systematic degradation of Armageddon's support systems amplified the effectiveness of Angron's direct assaults, preventing Imperial forces from mounting coordinated counterattacks. The Iron Warriors established forward operating bases in the industrial sectors, converting manufacturing facilities to produce ammunition and replacement parts for their war machines. The Legion's approach to urban warfare during this campaign revealed their tactical evolution since the heresy. Rather than applying their traditional siege methodology directly, they adapted it to the Hive environment. Squads of Terminators equipped with specialized breaching equipment moved through the Underhive, emerging at calculated weak points behind Imperial defensive lines. Meanwhile, their Demon engines were deployed with unusual precision, targeting structural support columns and transit hubs that, when destroyed, collapsed entire sections of the Hive onto defending forces. Though the intervention of the Grey Knights ultimately turned the tide against the Chaos forces, the Iron Warriors withdrew in good order, preserving much of their strength. This disciplined retreat stood in stark contrast to the World Eaters, who fought to the last in bloody close combat. Kronos extracted his forces according to pre-established protocols, destroying evidence of their technical innovations and leaving behind automated defense systems to harass Imperial reconstruction efforts. The Gothic War provided another theater where Iron Warriors' expertise proved devastatingly effective. While Abaddon's Black Legion formed the primary Chaos Force during this conflict, Iron Warriors' detachments played a crucial specialized role in neutralizing heavily defended Imperial installations. Warsmith Havelock's 14th Grand Company focused on eliminating orbital defense platforms that protected key Gothic sector worlds from the Planet Killer's approach. Havelock's methodology during these operations demonstrated the Legion's mastery of void warfare. Iron Warriors boarding teams deployed from modified Iconoclast-class destroyers, vessels specifically reconfigured to survive the intense defensive fire long enough to deliver their lethal cargo. Once aboard the Imperial platforms, breacher teams established beachheads with portable void shields, while obliterators provided heavy fire support, their weapon symbiosis allowing them to counter any defensive response. The Iron Warriors' technical expertise proved particularly valuable in neutralizing the platform's reactor cores. Rather than simply destroying these power sources, their warpsmiths reconfigured them to overload in sequence, creating cascading energy discharges that disabled defense systems across entire orbital grids. This precision targeting allowed Abaddon's main fleet to approach high-value worlds without facing the full force of Imperial defenses. Beyond these supporting roles, Iron Warriors' forces secured several strategic victories of their own during the Gothic War. The assault on the Forge world cast Thravian exemplified their approach to attacking heavily mechanized targets. Recognizing the Adeptus Mechanicus dependence on centralized data networks, they deployed specialized tech-viral weaponry that corrupted machine spirits throughout the Forge complexes. As the planet's automated defenses turned against their masters, Iron Warriors' assault teams breached the weakened perimeter and secured the primary manufacturing facilities. Rather than simply destroying these valuable resources, Warsmith Havelock implemented a more calculated approach. Selected production lines were dismantled and transported to Iron Warriors' vessels, while others were corrupted through the introduction of chaos-influenced machine code. This corruption spread throughout the Forge world's noosphere, creating lingering technical heresies that would continue to manifest in manufactured components for centuries after the Iron Warriors' departure. The most notorious Iron Warriors campaign of the late 41st millennium was undoubtedly Warsmith Hansu's Skull Harvest and subsequent invasion of Ultramar. The Skull Harvest itself represented a significant innovation in how the Legion acquired resources and manpower. Held on the demon world of New Badab, this tournament of chaos warbands saw Hansu defeat numerous rivals, absorbing their forces into his own and dramatically expanding his military capabilities beyond the traditional limitations of a single grand company. This approach to force expansion demonstrated the Iron Warriors' pragmatic adaptation to the realities of the Long War. With limited access to new gene seed and the challenges of creating traditional Astartes, Hansu overcame these constraints by essentially acquiring pre-made warriors through combat dominance. The forces gathered included not only Chaos Space Marines from various renegade factions, but also specialized units like the demon-possessed Bloodborne and the biotechnically enhanced Chrome Hounds. The newly strengthened force that emerged from the Skull Harvest bore Hansu's personal mark rather than traditional Iron Warriors iconography, signaling a significant evolution in how the Legion organized for major operations. This hybrid force combined Iron Warriors' tactical doctrine with the specialized capabilities of the absorbed warbands, creating an unusually versatile Chaos army capable of operations beyond the typical Iron Warrior siege specialization. The centerpiece of Hansu's technical innovation was the Demonculaba, a horrific fusion of biological engineering and warpcraft designed to create new Chaos Space Marines without traditional geneseed limitations. Established in the fortress of Kalin Gal on Medringard, this abominable process involved the transformation of female captives into grotesquely enlarged incubation chambers. Human adolescents were sealed within these living wombs, their bodies forcibly transformed through a combination of chemical treatments, warp exposure, and stolen Imperial Fist's gene seed. The Demonculaba exemplified the Iron Warrior's willingness to pursue technological solutions to strategic problems, regardless of moral considerations. The Legion's dwindling supply of pure gene seed had long constrained their ability to replace battle losses, a critical vulnerability in the long war against the Imperium. Hansu's creation, while monstrous even by Chaos standards, offered a potential solution to this existential threat, producing new warriors who, while often malformed, could still serve effectively in combat operations. The Ultramar invasion that followed demonstrated how Iron Warriors' warfare had evolved beyond simple siege operations. Hansu's campaign incorporated multiple dimensions of warfare, including psychological operations, biological attacks, and the exploitation of civilian infrastructure. The deployment of the newborn, products of the Demonculaba, alongside conventional Iron Warriors forces created an army with unusual tactical flexibility, capable of both methodical siege warfare and terror operations against civilian populations. Iron Warriors forces systematically targeted Ultramar's agricultural and water purification systems, introducing toxins designed to render entire regions uninhabitable for generations. These attacks showed a sophisticated understanding of infrastructure dependencies, focusing not on immediate military targets, but on the support systems that maintained Ultramar's economic and social cohesion. By contaminating food production and water supplies, Hansu created cascading crises that diverted ultramarine resources from direct military response. The campaign featured innovative applications of demon engine technology as well. Modified defilers deployed virus dispensers rather than traditional weapons, spreading engineered pathogens through civilian population centers. Specially designed Mauler fiends incorporated sonic disruption fields that shattered rockcrete structures through harmonic resonance, bringing down HAB blocks without the need for conventional explosives. These technical adaptations maximized the terror impact of each attack while preserving the Iron Warriors' limited ammunition supplies for priority military targets. Though ultimately defeated by a coalition of Ultramarines, their successor chapters, and Imperial Guard forces, Hansu's campaign inflicted lasting damage on Guilliman's realm. Beyond the immediate destruction of infrastructure and military assets, the psychological impact on Ultramar's population created lingering effects that manifested in increased unrest, reduced productivity, and a general degradation of the efficiency for which the realm was renowned. This focus on systemic damage, rather than simple military victory, typified the evolved Iron Warriors' approach to warfare. The Legion's participation in Abaddon's Black Crusades has consistently demonstrated their value as siege specialists within larger Chaos operations. During the 13th Black Crusade, Iron Warriors forces under Warsmith Crom played a crucial role in neutralizing the Cadian orbital defense platforms. Their methodical approach contrasted sharply with the more direct assaults favored by other traitor legions, focusing on systematic target degradation rather than overwhelming force. Crom's forces deployed specialized munitions designed to penetrate the platform's void shields at specific harmonic frequencies, creating momentary windows of vulnerability that allowed precision strikes against power distribution nodes. Iron Warriors boarding teams followed these breaches, establishing beachheads with portable void shields, while obliterators provided heavy fire support. Once aboard, they implemented a standard template operation, secure command centers, neutralize communication systems, and reconfigure life support to eliminate defenders without damaging critical infrastructure. Rather than simply destroying these platforms, the Iron Warriors repurposed many of them to serve as fire bases for subsequent operations against Cadia itself. This approach reflected their waste, not philosophy of warfare, where captured resources are immediately incorporated into ongoing operations. The reprogrammed defense platforms provided invaluable fire support during the ground assault, targeting Imperial Navy vessels attempting to reinforce the beleaguered planet. On Cadia's surface, the Iron Warriors applied their siege expertise to the infamous Cassar fortress cities. While Black Legion forces conducted frontal assaults against the primary defensive positions, Iron Warriors sappers established elaborate tunnel networks beneath the fortifications. These tunnels followed mathematically precise patterns designed to undermine structural supports while avoiding detection by Imperial Auspex systems. When detonated in sequence, these subterranean charges created catastrophic structural failures that collapsed entire defensive sectors. The Iron Warriors' technical adaptation to counter evolving Imperial defenses has been one of their defining characteristics throughout the Long War. As Loyalist fortifications incorporated new technologies and architectural principles, the Sons of Perturabo methodically analyzed these innovations and developed specific countermeasures. This process of technical evolution and counter-evolution has played out across thousands of battlefields over 10 millennia. The Siege of Hydra Cordatus demonstrated this adaptive approach against modern Imperial defenses. The target fortress incorporated overlapping void shield generators, automated defense turrets with machine spirit targeting systems, and adamantium reinforced ferrocrete walls designed to withstand sustained bombardment. Rather than attempting to overcome these defenses through simple application of firepower, Warsmith Hansu implemented a multi-phase approach that systematically neutralized each protective layer. The operation began with specialized electronic warfare units targeting the fortress's communication systems, isolating its defenders from potential reinforcement. Iron Warriors warpsmiths then deployed modified scrap code that infected the automated defense systems, causing targeting errors that reduced their effectiveness without completely disabling them, a subtle approach that delayed detection of the compromise. Meanwhile, their artillery units conducted precisely calculated bombardments that appeared random, but actually mapped the void shield coverage through analysis of energy discharge patterns. Having identified weak points in the defensive systems, the Iron Warriors deployed their specialized breaching assets. Terminator squads equipped with conversion beamers targeted void shield generator power conduits, creating momentary fluctuations that allowed Dreadclaw drop pods to penetrate the defensive envelope. These initial forces secured landing zones for the main assault, which included demon engines specifically configured for the operation. The most innovative aspect of this assault was the Iron Warriors' counter to the fortress's reinforced architecture. Rather than attempting to breach the adamantium-reinforced walls directly, they deployed modified Mauler fiends equipped with phase field generators. These devices, developed through collaboration with Dark Mechanicum Hirdex, allowed the demon engines to partially phase through solid matter, bypassing physical barriers entirely. Once inside, they rematerialized and attacked the fortress from within, opening gates and disabling internal defenses to allow the main force entry. This operation exemplified the Iron Warriors' approach to modern siege warfare, a combination of traditional military principles with technological innovation and warp-derived capabilities. Unlike legions that relied primarily on demon-granted powers or overwhelming numbers, the Sons of Perturabo maintained their identity as technical specialists who approached warfare as an engineering problem to be solved through calculated application of appropriate tools. Throughout these campaigns, the Iron Warriors have maintained their distinctive operational methodology while adapting to changing circumstances. Their approach to warfare remains fundamentally pragmatic, focused on achieving objectives through efficient application of available resources rather than pursuing glory or excess for its own sake. This pragmatism extends to their use of chaos powers, viewing demonic entities and warp energies as tools to be utilized rather than masters to be served. In the wake of the Great Rift's violent birth, the Iron Warriors found themselves facing a galaxy transformed. The immense warp tier that split the Imperium in twain offered unprecedented strategic opportunities for Perturabo's sons, while simultaneously presenting new challenges that tested even their renowned adaptability. The demon Primarch himself, long secluded in his impossible fortress on Medringard, stirred with renewed purpose as the barriers between real space and the warp thinned across the galaxy. Perturabo's ascension to demonhood following the Iron Cage had fundamentally altered his nature, though not in the manner exhibited by Primarchs like Angron or Mortarion. Where they became extensions of their patron gods, the Lord of Iron maintained his fundamental character, his cold calculation, his architectural genius, and his bitter resentment. His physical form transformed into something both mechanical and demonic, a perfect fusion of his technological mastery and the raw power of chaos undivided. Massive pistons and gears of impossible materials merged with flesh that constantly shifted between organic matter and living metal. From his fortress on Medringard, Perturabo maintained sporadic contact with his legion through the Trident, his inner circle of most trusted warsmiths. These rare communications typically consisted of complex technical specifications for new war machines or fortress designs rather than traditional orders. The warsmiths interpreted these blueprints as both practical instruction and philosophical guidance, implementing the underlying principles across their grand companies while adapting the specifics to their immediate tactical needs. The arrival of the Cicatrix Maledictum changed this dynamic. Astropathic communications reported that the demon Primarch had emerged from his inner sanctum for the first time in millennia, ascending to the highest tower of his fortress to observe the transformed galaxy. In the days that followed, Iron Warriors across the galaxy received unprecedented direct communication from their Gene Father, precise targeting data for Imperial worlds left vulnerable by the Great Rift, specifications for warp-resistant fortifications to secure new territories, and strategic assessments of the shifting balance of power. This renewed engagement coincided with a significant escalation in Iron Warriors' activity across multiple sectors. Warsmiths who had operated independently for centuries suddenly coordinated their efforts, creating campaign fronts that stretched across dozens of systems. These operations displayed a level of strategic cohesion not seen since the Heresy, suggesting Perturabo's direct influence on Legion-wide planning. Most significantly, these campaigns targeted not just military objectives, but systematically attacked the infrastructure binding the fragmented Imperium together. The Parmenio campaign exemplified this approach. As the Great Rift stabilized, this Forge world complex in the Segmentum Pacificus found itself isolated from Terra, dependent on locally sourced materials and protection. Iron Warriors' forces under Warsmith Kalvax deployed with unusual speed, establishing siege positions around the primary Forge cities before Imperial defenders could properly assess the changed strategic landscape. Rather than launching immediate assaults, Kalvax implemented what Legion doctrine termed systematic degradation, precisely targeted strikes against power generation, water purification, and atmospheric processors. Within weeks, the Forge world's manufacturing output dropped by 60% as technical adepts struggled to maintain essential systems. Iron Warriors' artillery maintained a mathematically precise bombardment pattern, destroying repair teams and replacement components with equal efficiency. When the Mechanicus defenders finally attempted a breakout to secure secondary generators, they faced Iron Warriors' defensive positions that had anticipated not just the assault vectors, but the specific Skitarii maneuver patterns used by that particular Forge world. The most innovative aspect of the campaign was the Iron Warriors' counter to the Mechanicus Noospheric advantage. Specialized warpsmith teams deployed modified scrap code that didn't attempt to corrupt machine spirits directly, a tactic the Mechanicus had developed strong countermeasures against, but instead created subtle calculation errors in targeting systems and manufacturing tolerances. These errors compounded over time, causing weapons to fail at critical moments and replacement parts to fit improperly. By the time the Forge world surrendered, its manufacturing capabilities had been compromised at such a fundamental level that the Iron Warriors simply incorporated the entire complex into their supply chain rather than destroying it. This technical sophistication reflected the Iron Warriors' ongoing adaptation to changing Imperial capabilities. While maintaining their core identity as siege specialists, the Legion had systematically analyzed developments in Imperial defensive doctrines and technology, developing specific countermeasures for each innovation. This process accelerated following the introduction of Primaris Space Marines, whom the Iron Warriors encountered during the invasion of Rhokkos. The initial confrontation with these enhanced Astartes proved costly for the traders. Warsmith Edirax's assault on the Hive world met unexpected resistance when Primaris reinforcements arrived from the Indomitus Crusade. The new warriors' enhanced physiology, superior weaponry, and tactical flexibility forced the Iron Warriors to withdraw from positions they had secured at significant cost. Edirax survived the retreat, bringing with him something more valuable than territorial gains: comprehensive combat data on the Primaris Marines' capabilities and limitations. This intelligence disseminated rapidly throughout the Legion. Iron Warriors' apothecaries conducted extensive analysis of recovered Primaris gene seed and tissue samples, while warpsmiths examined captured Mark X armor components and bolt weaponry. Within months, Legion armories produced modified ammunition specifically calibrated to penetrate Gravis armor at its connection points, while tactical doctrines evolved to counter the increased mobility of Primaris assault formations. The Legion's response to the Primaris threat demonstrated their pragmatic approach to warfare. Rather than viewing these enhanced warriors with superstitious dread or dismissing them as mere propaganda, the Iron Warriors treated them as a technical problem requiring technical solutions. Warsmith Toromino's forces on Verox Prime demonstrated these adaptations when they encountered Primaris-exclusive chapters deployed from the Indomitus Crusade. Iron Warriors' heavy weapons teams targeted Inceptor squads during their descent phase, when their jump packs generated maximum energy signatures, but before their weapons came into effective range. Meanwhile, specialized Havoc teams equipped with modified autocannons systematically eliminated aggressor squads, exploiting their limited maneuverability with precisely calculated crossfires. Most significantly, the Iron Warriors adjusted their force composition to counter the Primaris threat. Traditional tactical squads were supplemented with increased numbers of obliterators, whose weapon symbiosis allowed them to rapidly adapt to different Mark X armor variants. Demon engine deployment patterns evolved to counter the increased firepower of Primaris formations, with Defilers and Mauler Fiends operating in hunter-killer pairs that combined ranged suppression with rapid close assault capabilities. These tactical adaptations reflected the Iron Warriors' broader approach to the transformed galaxy. Unlike legions like the World Eaters or Emperor's Children, who viewed the Great Rift primarily as an opportunity for unrestrained violence or sensation-seeking, the Sons of Perturabo approached it with calculated pragmatism. The weakened barriers between real space and the warp offered enhanced access to demonic allies and warp-based weaponry, resources to be exploited rather than worshipped or indulged in. This pragmatic approach extended to their relationship with the mortal populations in territories they controlled. While other traitor legions typically treated humans as sacrificial fodder or playthings, the Iron Warriors implemented systematic population management. Conquered worlds saw their inhabitants categorized based on utility. Technical specialists were implanted with control devices and assigned to maintenance duties. Physically capable specimens were conscripted into labor battalions or combat training, and those deemed unsuitable were processed through the flesh forges to provide raw materials for demon engines. The Vigilus campaign demonstrated the effectiveness of this approach. As Abaddon's Black Legion forces engaged in direct confrontation with Imperial defenders, Iron Warriors detachments under Warsmith Gorath secured the Underhive regions and industrial sectors. Rather than purging the local population, Gorath implemented a graduated control system. Work crews were established under the supervision of Iron Warriors overseers, converting manufacturing facilities to produce ammunition and replacement parts. Meanwhile, specialized technical teams infiltrated the Hive's infrastructure, introducing subtle corruptions to power distribution and water purification systems that weakened resistance without rendering the Hive uninhabitable. This methodical approach to warfare has maintained the Iron Warriors' position as among the most dangerous traitor legions in the Dark Millennium. While they lack the raw numbers of the Black Legion or the religious fervor of the Word-Bearers, their technical expertise and organizational cohesion make them uniquely capable of exploiting the strategic opportunities presented by the transformed galaxy. Their operations target not just military objectives, but the fundamental systems that allow the Imperium to function across the void between stars. The Legion's enduring legacy as masters of siege warfare continues to shape Imperial defensive doctrine. Fortress worlds throughout the Imperium incorporate specific countermeasures designed to resist Iron Warriors' assault methods, often at the expense of effectiveness against other threats. The psychological impact of their reputation extends beyond practical defensive considerations. Imperial commanders facing confirmed Iron Warriors deployments typically request disproportionate reinforcement, diverting resources from other fronts even before the first shot is fired. This psychological dimension reflects perhaps the most distinctive aspect of Iron Warriors' operations in the 42nd millennium, their calculated use of bitter pragmatism as a weapon in itself. Where other Chaos forces rely on supernatural horror or overwhelming savagery, the Iron Warriors present a coldly rational approach to atrocity that many Imperial defenders find more disturbing than overt demonology. Their methodical destruction of civilian infrastructure, systematic processing of populations, and mathematically precise application of force serve as constant reminders that chaos can manifest through order as easily as through disorder. As the Dark Millennium progresses, the Iron Warriors stand as a testament to Perturabo's enduring vision, a legion that has maintained its fundamental identity and purpose across 10,000 years of exile. While other traitor legions lost themselves to their patron gods or fractured into competing warbands, the Sons of Iron preserved their organizational cohesion and tactical doctrine. They remain siege masters without peer fortress breakers who approach warfare as an engineering problem to be solved through calculated application of appropriate force. The bitter pragmatism that defines the Legion has proven remarkably resilient against the corrupting influence of the warp. Where faith, honor, or pleasure offered pathways to corruption for other legions, the Iron Warriors' cold utilitarianism provided a different kind of protection, not against chaos itself, but against the loss of purpose that typically accompanies it. In embracing bitterness as their defining characteristic, they created an emotional fortress as impregnable as any physical stronghold, a bulwark against the dissolution that claimed so many of their fellow traitors. This resilience ensures that the Iron Warriors will remain a critical threat to Imperial security for millennia to come. As the Imperium struggles to rebuild following the devastation of the Great Rift, Perturabo's sons methodically identify structural weaknesses and pressure points in its reconstituted defenses. Each fortress breached, each world conquered, each population process serves not just immediate tactical objectives, but contributes to the Legion's long-term strategic goal, the systematic dismantling of the Imperium that rejected their sacrifices and denied their achievements. In this endless cycle of siege and counter-siege, the Iron Warriors have found a form of immortality. The bitter sons of Perturabo continue their long war against the Imperium, their methods evolving while their fundamental nature remains unchanged, pragmatic, methodical, and utterly without mercy. The walls of the galaxy may stand high, but the Iron Warriors will bring them down, one calculated blow at a time.